Love Wins in Berlin. Written by Barbara Cartland. Narrated by Anthony Wren. Chapter 1. 1890. Simona moved around the house, fascinated by everything she saw. It had been a great adventure for her to travel to Germany to stay with her school friend Karoline von Honentaal. When she was 17, her mother and father had thought she could complete her education at a finishing school. They were told that undoubtedly the best in Europe was in Florence. The girls learned a thorough appreciation of old master paintings. They were also taught interior decoration, which their parents believed would stand them in good stead when they were married. Simona was extremely intelligent. She had been educated by a variety of governesses and tutors, but especially, as she always acknowledged, by her father. Lord Belgrave was well known as the most able politician and an outstanding member of the House of Lords. His speeches on the current European situation invariably received attention. He had been bitterly disappointed not to have produced a son and heir. He therefore concentrated on making sure that his daughter was as well educated as a son would have been. In the country, Simona rode her father's finest and fastest horses and, against her mother's protests, had learned to shoot. "I cannot think," Lady Belgrave said, "why you should want to kill anything. In my opinion, although no man would agree with me, it is cruel and unnecessary." "I have no intentions, Mamma, of shooting birds or even rabbits," Simona argued. "But Papa thinks that if I am to travel about the world, as he hopes I will, I should be able to protect myself." Lady Belgrave held up her hands. "If your father is going to turn you into a traveller and an explorer, as he was when he was a young man, then I give up all hope of your ever settling down with a charming husband and a large family." Simona laughed. "There is plenty of time for that, Mamma, and I do want to see something of the world first." It was of course her father who insisted that they spent their holidays in various parts of France. One year they had visited Spain, and the questioning of a finishing school arose. It was, of course, Lord Belgrave who found out from his friends in the House of Lords about the school in Florence. All the aristocrats in Europe, he was told, sent their daughters there. "I consider it in this day and age," he told his wife, "that English children should have a cosmopolitan education. After all, we govern a large part of the world with our empire, and I think it important that we should get to know and understand our European neighbours." "I agree with you," Lady Belgrave replied. "But you often forget, Edward dear, that Simona is not yet 18. When she is, she must have a season in London and be presented to the Queen." "I do remember," Lord Belgrave said, "but I think it would be an excellent opportunity for her to spend the last year of her education in Florence. You know as well as I do that it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world." Lady Belgrave had been obliged to agree with him. As usual, her husband had his way and Simona was sent to Florence. It was in Florence that she became friends with Karoline, a very attractive German girl whose family lived in Berlin. It was because they were such good friends that Simona soon picked up the German language, and Karoline similarly improved her English. Lady Belgrave planned to open their London house in April for the season. Karoline, who was leaving school in March at the same time as Simona, asked her to come with her for a visit. "I would love to accept," Simona sighed, "and I am sure Papa will think it an excellent chance of improving my German." "It is pretty good already," Karoline smiled. "I am sure Papa will wish it to be perfect," Simona replied, "and that is going to be my strongest argument for accepting your invitation." She managed to get her own way. Lady Belgrave merely complained that it would be a terrible rush when she returned to prepare all her clothes for her debut. Simona, however, was far more interested in visiting Germany than in bothering so far ahead about her appearance. When she returned, she would concentrate on what to wear at the innumerable balls her mother was expecting her to attend in London. Karoline had told her so much about Germany, but Simona had not expected Berlin to be so large, or indeed so impressive. The houses, as they drove through the wide streets, all seemed large enough to be palaces. Baron von Honentaal's was no exception. From her father and mother, and also from the school in Florence, Simona had learned a great deal about furniture. She was therefore fascinated by the contents of the Baron's house. Inside, it seemed to her to be like a fairy palace. Never had she imagined anyone could have in their own home so much elaborate gold ornamentation. She was to learn that rococo was something that all Germans appreciated. On the night that she and Karoline arrived, there was a large dinner party for friends who were visiting Berlin unexpectedly. The next day, because Karoline was home from school, they were invited for luncheon with some of her relations. Their house was just as large, if not larger, than the Baron's. Simona found it difficult to concentrate on the conversation. She was surrounded by pictures which she knew were as fine as she had ever seen in any art gallery. The furniture not only glittered, but had, she was sure, a history that was more fascinating than any novel she had read. During the first 2 days of her visit, she hardly found time to think. She was introduced to person after person. They all seemed to have something distinguished about them, which Karoline related to her later. This afternoon, for the first time, Simona found herself alone. She was, for once, not rushing from one huge house to another, or driving down the wide avenues in an elegant carriage drawn by outstandingly well-bred horses. Now I have a chance to explore, she told herself. She was alone because Karoline had arranged an appointment with the dentist, and the Baroness had accompanied her. "I am sure you will find something to do," Karoline had said before she left, "and I will be as quick as I can." "I want to look at your wonderful pictures," Simona had answered, "and I feel I shall not get even halfway round the house before it is dark." The Baroness laughed. "I am glad you appreciate art," she replied. "My husband is very proud of his possessions, but I often think Karoline takes them too much for granted." Simona thought the Baron had good reason to be proud. She had never seen such a collection of fine paintings, all in elaborate gilt frames. In some rooms, the walls seemed a little overcrowded, yet it was excusable, considering that every picture was a gem in its own right. When she returned her attention to the furniture, she found it hard to realize that anyone could possess so many carved gilt tables and cabinets. Some of the pieces she had already learned from Karoline had come from France and Russia. There was a set of very fine King Charles II chairs from England in the dining room. She moved from room to room, wishing her father was with her. She was quite certain he could have told her a story about every artist and every sculptor. "I am sure that the Baron keeps a catalogue of everything in his house," Simona thought, "and I will take a copy back to Papa, and he will be very impressed at what I am looking at now." As she walked down a wide passage on the ground floor, she was conscious as she did so that she was walking on an exquisitely made Persian carpet. At the end of it was Baron von Honentaal's study. Although Karoline had taken her quickly round a number of the rooms, she had merely pointed to the door of the study, saying, "That is Papa's sanctuary, where he receives all the important people who come to visit him. He is angry if I intrude on him when he is busy." Simona knew that the Baron was out at that particular moment. She thought that this was her opportunity to peep, if nothing more, into the sanctuary. She opened the door and found the room was rather as she had expected. Very large and impressive, the sanctuary boasted both pictures and furniture that appeared to be even more spectacular than she had already been appreciating. The pictures, particularly by Rubens and Rembrandt, made her draw in her breath. Then, at the far end of the room, she saw something quite extraordinary that she had never seen before. She thought at first it was a very large cabinet. It was in red lacquer, picked out with a profusion of gold carvings. She looked at it again, fascinated because it was so unusual. She thought that it might be a Sedan Chair, used in the East, undoubtedly by a royal parsonage on special occasions. As she grew closer, she realized that it was indeed a Sedan Chair, and more unusual than she had ever imagined. The small windows were of gold mesh, through which someone inside could see out, but not be seen. She could not resist putting out her hand and opening the door. Inside was one low seat and nothing else. "I am sure this Sedan Chair has a fabulous history to tell," Simona said to herself. Then unexpectedly, she heard voices. As she turned to listen, she realized it was two men speaking in German, and they seemed to be coming down the passage towards her. She felt embarrassed at being found in the Baron's sanctuary. Without thinking and acting on impulse, she slipped inside the sedan chair and closed the door behind her. Even as she did so, she heard the Baron's voice say, "Come in, Karl. It was lucky I caught you before you left." "I tried to see you yesterday," the man called Karl answered, "but I was told you were called to the palace. I was busy with a number of other appointments, so I did not get a chance of coming to see you last night." "We have a short time together before you must catch your train," the Baron said, "and I am very anxious to know how matters are progressing." Karl grunted. "Not very well, I'm afraid. As you well know, our Emperor is always impatient and dislikes being kept waiting." "You mean you have no further information about the gun?" the Baron asked. "Alas, no," Karl replied. "How are you faring with the man Watson?" The Baron shook his head. "He is extremely obstinate. We have him, of course, well guarded in the Panzer house, in case anyone should try to wrest him away from us. But so far it appears no one seems particularly interested." "I am sure, nevertheless, someone must be," Karl insisted. "After all, I understand he was one of the main designers of the gun." "We have tried," the Baron responded, "to persuade him to give us a drawing of his work, or even an explanation of how it will perform when it is in action." "And he will not oblige?" Karl questioned. "He pleads ignorance," the Baron replied. "And that, as you well know, is very difficult to pin down or translate into anything that is of slight use to us." Karl gave a short laugh. "You are right there, and I am finding it very difficult indeed to persuade anyone to talk about the gun." "Have you managed to meet the Marquis of Midhurst?" the Baron inquired. "I have only been introduced to him at a party," Karl said. "I understand he is very fastidious about making friends and in any case prefers the opposite sex, so I cannot claim that I have achieved very much in that direction." "But you must be aware," the Baron said in a low voice, "that the Marquis is the key to the whole operation. I am told on good authority that the gun was in his own conception in the first place, and he has persuaded the Prince of Wales to take a personal interest in its development." Yes, Karl said. "I know that, but I can assure you it is very difficult for a young man like myself to join the Prince of Wales set. They are all very smart, very fast, and very sure of their own importance." "Surely," the Baron asked, "Queen Victoria, who is still mourning her German husband, is prepared to receive you?" "Of course," Karl replied. "Her Majesty was extremely gracious and talked to me for a very long time about her family, with whom I have a slight acquaintance. But it is not her family in whom we are interested." "Of course not," the Baron agreed. "It is the Marquis who you must arrange to meet and persuade him that the one subject in which you are really interested is the development of weapons like the gun." "I assure you, Baron, I am doing my best," Karl asserted, "and in this respect, I do bring some news for you." "What news?" "I am reliably informed that the Marquis of Midhurst is planning a visit to Berlin." "I do not believe it," the Baron exclaimed. "It is true," Karl said, "and I thought it might be possible for you to give me a letter to him, inviting him to stay with you. You can remind him that you enjoyed a brief acquaintance with his mother, and I do not think the Marquis would enjoy staying at the British Embassy, nor will he be invited to the palace." "That is definitely unlikely," the Baron said, "for the simple reason that he is a close friend of the Prince of Wales. As we all know, the tension between the Emperor and the Prince grows more pronounced year by year." "That is so," Karl accepted, "and there is no doubt that the Prince resents the fact that his nephew is now an all-highest, the third Emperor of the Third Empire in Europe." His voice rose as he spoke, which made his words seem almost triumphant. "We are all aware of that," the Baron added quickly, "which is the reason why we must learn more about this gun. It is imperative that we produce one which is more powerful and effective than anything produced by the British." "What I am suggesting," Karl said, lowering his voice, "is that you, Baron, invites the Marquis to stay here with you as your guest. I have the idea, although I may be wrong, that he is coming to Berlin ostensibly for a holiday, but in reality, he is looking for Watson. Do you think Watson is that important? The Baron asked sharply. I am sure he is, Karl replied, and I should have thought by this time that if he will not collaborate as you have asked him to do, you should go a little further. There was a silence before the Baron said, I have always been against torture of prisoners. It often results in suicide, which means they are of no further use. I realize that, but somehow you have to make him talk. We are trying, I assure you we are trying, the Baron stated positively. He paused for a moment. I did not think he is important enough to bring the Marquis of Midhurst to Berlin. Well, he is coming, Karl said, and I do beg you to give me a letter of invitation for him. There is a fair chance he will accept, and who knows what you might find out from him. Perhaps after dinner, when the wine has been particularly delicious. There was a further silence, and then the Baron said in a different tone, I have a better idea. I have been told that the Marquis is notable as a ladies' man, but he is determined not to get married. In fact, living in London, you must have heard people say that nothing will persuade him to find a wife as someone in his position should do. Yes, I have heard this story, Karl agreed. Then I suggest that if I can persuade him to stay here, I should make his visit particularly enjoyable, by including Savannah. Karl made a sound of triumph. Baron, you are a genius, he exclaimed. I would never have thought of such an idea. Of course, Savannah could extract a secret, however well hidden, from the Sphinx itself. That is what I always heard, the Baron said complacently, and she has been brilliantly successful on every occasion when we have sought her help. And she must be no less brilliant on this occasion, Karl stressed. I am sure that when we tell His Majesty of your scheme, he will be delighted. He is very disappointed at present, because I have no news for him. He sighed as if he was envisioning a particularly unpleasant interview. The Baron rose from his comfortable chair. I will write a letter of invitation at once, he said. Then I think you should be on your way to the railway station. Karl looked at the clock. You are right, he responded. I am glad that we have had this conversation, and I definitely feel more confident now than I did earlier. The Baron sat down at his writing desk while he wrote quickly on his heavily engraved writing paper. He folded the letter into an envelope and sealed it, imprinting his seal with his signet ring. He handed the letter to Karl. I think the Right Honourable Marquis will find it difficult to refuse my invitation without seeming rude. In fact, I am confident he will accept. When does he plan to arrive? I learned before I left England that it was to be at the beginning of next week, about the 22nd or the 23rd. Then I will be ready to receive him, the Baron said, and I will of course be in touch with Savannah immediately. I will return to England, feeling that the sun is shining and you have set me on the first step of the stairway to heaven, Karl enthused. The ambassador, who has been almost in tears under pressure from the Emperor, will now feel renewed hope. He walked to the door as he spoke, and the Baron followed him. Now, what you must do, Karl, he said as they moved into the passage, is to be very careful. The door closed behind them. Simona shuddered, feeling as if she had been holding her breath all the time they had been talking. She slowly opened the door of the sedan chair. She realized that she must flee the sanctuary immediately. The Baron would undoubtedly return when he had said farewell to Karl at the front door. She closed the sedan chair behind her and ran across the room. She opened the door very carefully, just in case the two men were still in sight. The corridor was empty. It would take them a little time to walk to the large hall where the footman would be on duty and say goodbye. She left the sanctuary, quietly shutting the door behind her. Then she walked quickly into one of the other rooms which opened into the corridor. It was one of those rooms where she had already been inspecting the pictures, but she knew that if anyone saw her here, it would be taken for granted that she was just looking around. She crossed the room to the window, looking out into the garden with unseeing eyes. Was it really possible that what she had heard was true? She could hardly believe it herself. The Baron, Karoline's father, who had seemed such a pleasant, kindly man, was holding an Englishman prisoner. He was trying to force from him the secret of an English gun that was being produced with the approval of the Prince of Wales. Karl was obviously a Secret Service agent, and, unless she was mistaken, he was posted at the German embassy in London. What was most important was that the Marquis of Midhurst was coming here, to Berlin. They were determined to extract from an Englishman called Watson the secret of this gun, and were intending to use a woman to do so. I must do something about this, Simona told herself. She wished she could ask her father's advice. There was, however, no time. The Marquis of Midhurst was to arrive in a few days. He would fall into the trap they were setting for him by coming to stay here in the Baron's house, and it would be too late for her father to give her any advice. The only thing I can do, Simona told herself, is to warn the Marquis when he arrives. As she mused about it, she realized that if she did so, it was unlikely he would believe her. He will think I have been reading too many novelettes, she thought, or possess an extremely foolish imagination. It was a problem that seemed almost impossible to solve. At the same time, how could she allow an Englishman to walk unwarily into a trap set for him by Germans? If they were so anxious to extract from him the secret of his gun, it was obviously too vital for England to be shared with any other nation. She had heard her father and others talk about the animosity between the Prince of Wales and the new Kaiser of Germany. Queen Victoria, who was the most powerful monarch in the world, had married her daughter Vicky to the Crown Prince of Germany. The Prince of Wales had regularly visited Vicky and was very fond, so everyone said, of his brother-in-law Fritz. Thinking it over now, Simona remembered her mother talking about them. She had said that the princess did not find life in Germany very congenial. She had found that the people were disagreeably provincial in their habits. They had lacked taste, and ate dinner at 5 o'clock. Yet, her father had added, I am always told that Her Royal Highness is extremely loyal to her adopted country, and will allow nothing to be said against the Germans. Most English people looked forward to seeing the princess on the throne of Germany. But in 1887, the Crown Prince complained of soreness in his throat, and his wife Vicky became full of anxiety and foreboding. It was then that opinion in England began to talk about the Crown Prince's eldest son, William, who was behaving in a very hostile manner to his mother, who nevertheless adored him. Of course, this news spread around the court at Windsor. From the court, it spread to the most important hostesses in London, and from them to the public. Simona could remember a remark her father had made at a dinner party to one of his fellow peers. Bismarck has been building up the strength of Germany, he had said, and has been quick to spot his opportunity. In what way? His friend had inquired. He is weaning young William away from his parents, Lord Belgrave replied. And I am told he has taught the boy to regard his father as an ineffectual visionary. I have also heard that story, the peer remarked. And what is more, Lord Belgrave had continued, he looks on his mother as a misguided Englishwoman who does not appreciate the great and glorious role that Germany is destined to play in the future. Simona had only been interested in this scenario when she became a friend of Karoline. She was quite upset when the Crown Prince, having ascended to the throne of Germany, died within 100 days. Naturally, in England, a royal death, especially when Queen Victoria was involved, caused a great deal of comment. It was soon known that young William was behaving with intolerable callousness and lack of feeling towards his mother. The embassy in Berlin, in fact, had sent a full account of his behaviour to the Queen, who had always been fond of Prince William. When he had been a youngster, he had paid her many visits to Osborne and Balmoral. He was brash and impetuous, but she had treated him with surprising leniency. He was her first grandson, and she never forgot that the Prince Consort had doted on him as an infant. In the years that followed, Lord Belgrave and everyone in court circles believed that Prince William was genuinely fond of his grandmother. But his Uncle Bertie aroused a strange resentment in him. It seemed unfair to William that the Prince of Wales should inherit an empire whose power was acknowledged from one end of the world to the other, while he was made to struggle to make people respect Germany's growing strength and importance. Lady Belgrave had always been sorry for Prince William. Simona had often heard her say, "His somewhat theatrical elegance is entirely due to the fact that his left arm was deformed when his mother experienced a very difficult time bringing him into the world, and it never grew beyond a twisted stump." "You may believe that," Lord Belgrave had replied, "but I personally think that he would have been just the same if he had been born with 2 arms as straight as ramrods." It was not easy to make excuses for Prince William. Only a few months after he had been crowned as the new Kaiser, he put all the conventional restraints of mourning aside. He invited himself to the courts of Russia and Austria. Everyone in England knew that Queen Victoria had remonstrated with him over this unseemly haste. He merely replied that there were dangers confronting monarchy all over the globe. "We emperors must stick together," he had proclaimed proudly. As Lord Belgrave had explained when he reported to the palace what he had heard. "The new Kaiser is prepared to accept his grandmother, Queen Victoria, the Empress of India, in the imperial circle of Europe, but he is determined to keep out Uncle Bertie, a mere Prince of Wales." Simona was thinking about these stories now, and of many other incidents that had been discussed and chewed over, not only in London, but in all the aristocratic houses of England. Everyone knew that there was a battle raging between the Kaiser and the Prince of Wales over the Cowes Regatta. The Prince, who was the Commodore of the Royal Yacht Squadron, had duly elected his nephew as a member, but it was a gesture he was to regret, when the relationship between them had sunk from being bad to truly appalling. The situation had not particularly interested Simona at the time. She could, however, remember that the yacht Hohenzollern, in which the Kaiser usually arrived at Cowes, was the largest and most powerful vessel of its kind afloat. In fact, it looked more like a warship than a pleasure boat. It was certainly a contrast to the Victoria and Albert, which was a pleasure yacht, and English from bow to stern. The Hohenzollern was just one example of Germany's determination to outshine everyone else at the regatta. The Kaiser had also brought a racing yacht with him. It had been especially designed to beat the Prince of Wales's Britannia, which it most certainly did. Everyone in England knew that the Prince was hurt and disappointed, and felt sympathetic. Lord Belgrave and a great many other statesmen were aware that the German Empire was thrusting vigorously and politically to dominate the continent. There was something else, even more perturbing. Germany hated and was envious of the British Empire. Therefore, she was not only determined to dominate the continent, but was already screaming for her place in the sun outside Europe. All these recollections surged in Simona's mind as she stood staring into the garden. She knew that at this very moment she had stumbled accidentally onto something significant that would undoubtedly contribute to the animosity between her country and Germany. The question was, what should she do about the conversation she had overheard? Of course, it was something that should not have happened. She should never have entered the Baron's sanctuary in the first place, unless she had been invited to do so. She should not have hidden herself in the Sedan Chair, but she had done so. She had thereby overheard that her host and the man who she realized was in the Kaiser's confidence were planning to spy on an Englishman. They were determined to obtain from him details of a gun, which eventually could be used in the defense of England. "I shall have to tell him what is happening," Simona said to herself. "I cannot allow him to be spied upon and seduced by a woman who is working for the Germans into giving away our secrets, which might prove of great value to Germany if they intend to attack other countries." She could not help thinking that if what she had heard was true about the hostility between the Kaiser and the Prince of Wales, the country the Germans might want to attack first could be her own. "I have to do something," she told herself. At the same time, she shrank from doing anything which would seem underhand, and could be seen as discourteous to her hosts who were entertaining her. Most of all, she hated the idea of having to admit that she had been eavesdropping or even spying on the Baron. She had been strictly brought up to how gentlefolk should behave. Her governesses, one after another, had told her, "A lady does not do this. A lady does not do that. A lady never tells a lie, but faces up to the truth no matter how difficult it may be." She could hear their voices repeating these words to her over and over again. "I am sure that whatever I say, no one will believe me," Simona whispered to herself. But she knew that she was only making excuses because she did not want to confess that she had been eavesdropping. "What can I do? What can I do?" she said aloud, looking at the sunshine. Suddenly she realized for the first time that as an Englishwoman her duty and above all her love must be for England. It was the land of her birth, the land she loved and its people loved her. In the face of whatever Germany might plot against England, every English citizen must protect their own country, just as a soldier must risk his life, so she must be prepared to risk her reputation if it was to protect her own country. It took her some time to work out a plan in her own mind, and she knew that there was no point in continually asking herself questions or prevaricating. When the Marquis arrived, she would have to warn him. Although he might disbelieve her and perhaps make it impossible for her to stay with Karoline any longer, it was her duty. She sighed deeply because it was all rather frightening. As she turned from the window, the door opened and Karoline walked in. "Oh, there you are, Simona," she exclaimed. "I have been looking for you everywhere. I have returned to find a very exciting invitation for both of us. We are asked to a dinner party tonight, and there will be dancing afterwards. That will be exciting." "Of course it will," Simona agreed. "Did the dentist hurt you?" "Not very much. I am certainly well enough to go to the party." Karoline laughed. She stretched out her hand and started to pull Simona towards the door. "Mamma is waiting for us in the drawing room," she said. "There are visitors for tea, and they have brought with them a very attractive young man, who I know you will enjoy meeting. He has already said he wants to meet you." "That sounds interesting," Simona answered. She raised her hands to tidy her hair. As she did so, she felt as if what had happened during the afternoon had just been a dream, and now she had come back to reality. The reality of enjoying herself with Karoline, and going to a dance, which she knew would be thrilling, especially as it would be the first dance she had been taken to in Berlin. "I did not believe that the Baron really means to spy on the Marquis," she tried to convince herself as they reached the drawing room. Then, as Karoline opened the door, she knew that once again she was only trying to evade the issue. At this moment, the future seemed dark and rather menacing. Chapter 2. From his box at Aintree, the Marquis of Midhurst was watching the Grand National horses taking the last fence. His horse, Crusader, was well up with the leaders. He was beginning to think he had a good chance of winning the race. Then, as the first 5 horses jumped the last fence without a fall, he was sure that Ilex was moving ahead. He knew all about Ilex, as when almost an unknown horse, he had won the hunter's steeplechase, on which occasion he fortunately had not been running one of his own horses. Ilex had been ridden by Arthur Nightingale, who the Marquis had marked in his mind as a particularly good jockey. Ilex, a chestnut, was not an engaging animal with no apparent neck or shoulders and an unusual amount of stomach. The Marquis had been told at the time of the steeplechase that a friend of his had offered Nightingale £5 not to ride. He was afraid the horse might fall and kill him. £5, as the Marquis knew, was the sum Nightingale would receive for the ride, but as he had already committed himself, he declined the offer. To his immense surprise, Ilex had given him an excellent ride. They had won the race in a canter, to the astonishment of the crowd. The Marquis had been considerably impressed. He had intended to make sure as soon as possible that Arthur Nightingale rode one of his own horses. He had, however, already engaged a jockey for the Grand National. He had expected Crusader to be the favourite, But when he had arrived at the course, he found that Ilex was running, once again ridden by Nightingale, and was the most favoured in the betting. Now, as the horses all quickened their pace, the crowd held their breath. The Marquis saw Ilex move ahead of Crusader and another horse to pass the winning post a clear length ahead. He was disappointed, but equally he was too much of a sportsman not to realise that the combination of Ilex and Nightingale had produced an outstanding performance. He descended from his box to see his own horse come in and to congratulate George Masterman, the owner of Ilex. "I have been very fortunate, my lord," Mr. Masterman said as the Marquis shook his hand. "I am afraid that you must be disappointed." "I had my hopes for a few moments," the Marquis admitted, "but I am quite content to agree that the best horse won." He walked away. Because he was so well known on the racecourse and greatly admired, a number of people shouted out, "Bad luck, my lord. Sorry you lost your money." The Marquis waved his hands in reply and decided now that the Grand National was over, he should leave. He wanted to return to London by an early train because he intended to go abroad the following day. He was on a special mission which would take him to Berlin. He was also anxious to get away from Lady Sybil Graham. The Marquis was noted for his many affairs de cour. At the same time, he was, unlike many of his contemporaries, very discreet about them. When he grew bored with a beautiful woman, as regularly happened, he invariably closed the affair at once. He achieved this by disappearing abroad for a short time. Alternatively, if the time of year was right, he would travel to Scotland for the grouse shooting and salmon fishing. He had been aware for the past few weeks that he was beginning to find the beautiful Lady Sybil was becoming a bore. He knew what she was going to say before she said it. He found that he was not paying her compliments. She was not listening to him. If there was one thing he found impossible, it was to continue making love to a woman when, if he was honest with himself, he was no longer interested in her. There had been quite a number of famous beauties who had asked themselves tearfully where they had failed with him. Few knew the story behind the Marquis's determination to remain a bachelor. His family begged him over and over again to marry so that he could produce an heir. He was extremely rich, with a magnificent ancestral country house which had been in his family for generations. Also, he was certainly one of the most handsome men in London. He was therefore undoubtedly the greatest matrimonial catch in the whole of the beau monde. Why, oh why, ambitious mothers with beautiful debutante daughters asked, does Erwin Midhurst refuse to be married? It was a great relief to the Marquis that very few people knew the truth. In fact, he seldom thought about what had happened to him and how events had so emphatically put him off choosing his bride. He had not quite turned 21 when his father, the third Marquis, had begun to talk to him about a bride. He frequently discussed with him the girls he considered the most suitable because of their ancestry and their family trees. Erwin had worked hard at Oxford and was about to take a commission in the family regiment. He had no wish to do anything but enjoy himself at the balls to which he was invited every night. He was a member of White's Club in St. James's, which he found extremely enjoyable. He had received the gift of 3 horses from his father's racing stables on his 20th birthday. He rode with the finest hunts in Leicestershire and received invitations to all the best shoots, both in England and Scotland. Erwin was very fond of his father. He also disliked altercations and rows of any description. Therefore he did not, as he realised later, protest firmly enough that he wished to remain a bachelor for a few more years. Almost before he was aware of it, his father had arranged his marriage. It was to the daughter of one of his closest friends, the Duke of Cumbria. Somewhat apprehensively, Erwin was introduced to his future wife, who was very young and undoubtedly very pretty. He could do nothing but agree with his father that she would look beautiful in the Midhurst diamonds, which were always greatly admired by every woman at the opening of Parliament, or any state occasion at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Erwin therefore dutifully asked Elizabeth if she would honour him by becoming his wife. When she accepted, the whole family rejoiced that he had done the right thing. Erwin's father and the Duke congratulated themselves on having bought off a coup that met with everyone's approval. Their engagement was celebrated with quite a number of bottles of champagne. Erwin was busy settling down in his regiment. He was therefore unable to pay much attention to Lady Elizabeth in the forthcoming weeks. It was decided that the announcement should appear in the newspapers at the very beginning of the season. No one would want to miss the wedding, which was to take place after both father and son had seen their horses race at Royal Ascot. Because nobody seemed to worry much about his opinion, Irvine reluctantly accepted what had been arranged for him. 2 days before the engagement was due to appear in the newspapers, the bombshell burst. Elizabeth had run away with her father's racehorse manager. At first, the Duke could not believe what had happened. The future bridegroom was as stunned as everyone else. It had never struck Irvine that Elizabeth might not be as delighted at the idea of marrying him as he might have expected her to be. He was well aware that many people, when they found out about his predicament, would laugh at him. They would be only too delighted that he had been taken down a peg or two, as they would put it. Irvine was not so stupid as not to realize that a number of his friends were jealous of him. These included gentlemen who had studied with him at Oxford and in his regiment. Of course, they did not have his money, nor could they afford their own racehorse. Moreover, because he was so handsome and important socially, the most attractive girls ran after him quite shamelessly. That Elizabeth had run away had not troubled Irvine's heart. He had not really been in love with her. But she had hurt his pride and his self-esteem. Incredibly, she had preferred a hired employee of her father's. The Duke raged and the Duchess cried, but Elizabeth was married at Gretna Green. There was nothing they could do to prevent it. Fortunately, from Irvine's point of view, her family wished to hush everything up. The Duke told everyone that Elizabeth was not well. Their doctor had advised that she should travel abroad for treatment at one of the French spas. Irvine was well aware that he had got off the hook lightly. At the same time, he vowed that never again would he be pushed into marriage, nor would he marry until he was very much older. In fact, he told himself, not until it was absolutely essential that before he died, he should produce a son and heir. He refused all the balls given for young ladies. Instead, he concentrated on pursuing, or perhaps it would be truer to say, on allowing himself to be pursued by beautiful, married women. In these affaires de cour, that taught him a great deal about what was called love. Yet, as he grew older, he regarded love with a somewhat cynical amusement. The Prince of Wales had made it acceptable for a gentleman to indulge in an affair with a lady of his own class. When His Royal Highness became interested in the Jersey Lily, as Lily Langtry was called, society held its breath. The prince made no effort to keep his obsession a secret. He refused to creep under dark corridors and visit the object of his affections secretly. He introduced Lily Langtry to his friends and to the public. At first they could hardly believe what was occurring, but the prince made it clear that if he was to be guest at a party, Mrs. Langtry should also be invited. A great number of gentlemen now realized they too could openly enjoy themselves. For the first time, there was no risk of being ostracized by grand society hostesses or facing a duel with an outraged husband. It made social life so much easier. There were few aged dowagers who were prepared to openly criticize the behavior of the Prince of Wales. When the prince arranged that Lily Langtry and her husband should be presented to his mother, Queen Victoria, at Windsor Castle, society could only gasp. Just a few critics muttered beneath their breath that they did not know what the world was coming to. Knowing that he was now bored with Lady Sybil had given the Marquis an inducement to go abroad. Actually, he had another reason for doing so. The Prime Minister, the Marquis of Salisbury, who was also the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, had begged him to visit Berlin. He was suspicious that the Germans had spirited away a man who was of great importance to the Royal Navy, and incidentally to the Prince of Wales as well. The prince had been irritated for many years by the behaviour of his nephew William, who had now become Kaiser Wilhelm II, and was becoming even more of a nuisance. In the past, he had made insulting remarks about his uncle, calling him an old peacock, and referring to his grandmother Queen Victoria as an old hag. Now he was a menace in a different way. The Prime Minister had been considerably perturbed when he heard that the young Kaiser had learned by heart the statistics of all the modern ships in the Royal Navy. He had acquired this knowledge to impress any British admiral with whom he might find himself in conversation. There were now quite a number of statesmen who feared that in the future Germany and the Kaiser might become even more envious of the power and influence of the British Empire. Last year, there had been a scene in Vienna when the Prince of Wales had been treated extremely rudely by his nephew. This year, the Kaiser had visited England, and he now seemed so determined to make himself pleasant that observers believed that uncle and nephew were getting along perfectly well together. The Kaiser had been delighted to be made an honorary admiral of the fleet, and he had already been made a member of the Royal Yacht Squadron. The Kaiser was intending not only to shine at Cowes as a brilliant yachtsman, but to challenge the Prince of Wales, who was known as the boss of Cowes. The Kaiser was also excessively inquisitive about the British warships. The Marquis had always been receptive to new ideas, and was particularly interested in naval armaments. It was then he had been struck by a new and brilliant idea. He had conceived the design of a gun, which was different from anything so far invented. It would be faster firing, more accurate, and easier to handle than anything at present in use on British ships of war. He had explained his concept to the Prince of Wales, who was delighted. The Prince himself was extremely keen on yacht racing, and his own cutter, the Britannia, had won many important races. Indeed, in his own estimation, it was the best racing yacht afloat. The Kaiser was determined to challenge the supremacy of the Britannia, and had boasted that he would do so. He had also announced bombastically that he intended using Cowes as a showplace for the latest warships in the German Navy. "What has he got that we haven't?" the Prince of Wales had inquired sharply. The Marquis's answer to the question was exactly what His Royal Highness wanted to hear. For some years, the Marquis had known a man called Paul Watson, who was skilled in repairing his shotguns and the equipment aboard his yacht. He had found Watson extremely intelligent, with very different ideas from those of ordinary gunsmiths, and he had entrusted him with many alterations and improvements to his yacht. He told him what he had in mind for his naval gun. Watson was delighted, and was able to contribute the sort of collaboration that the Marquis required. They had worked out several designs together. Just when they had agreed that they could make no further improvements, and were ready to start manufacturing the gun, Watson disappeared. He was a man approaching 40, unmarried, and without any family to tie him down. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. The Marquis found it hard to believe that he could not be found anywhere. It suddenly occurred to him that the Kaiser might have heard that he was working on something unusual. This information could have reached him from his spies, of whom there were quite a number in London. Furthermore, the Marquis could not entirely trust the Prince of Wales not to talk too much, as he was so delighted with the Marquis's invention, that he might have told his latest love all about it. In the Marquis's estimation, a woman could never be trusted with a secret. The Prince of Wales had by this time become bored with Lily Langtry. Their liaison, which had caused such a sensation, had come to an end. He had in fact fallen deeply in love with her. Love was something he had not felt for any woman since he had first fallen for his bride, Princess Alexandra of Denmark. It was Queen Victoria who had wisely decided that her hot-blooded son must choose a wife. But it was essential that she should be really beautiful. This necessity had not occurred to anyone else. The Queen had turned down all the available princesses in Europe until she came to Alexandra of Denmark, who was not likely to have been chosen in any other respects, but she was recognized to be the most beautiful princess of her time. There was no doubt that Bertie had thought so too, as he fell head over heels in love with Alexandra immediately on her arrival in England. They were exceedingly happy together, and she gave him 5 children before she was 26. Surprisingly, when the prince with his roving eye began to look elsewhere, she did not create a scene. She always supported and loved him in her own way, however unfaithful he was to her. For his part, he invariably treated her with the greatest respect and affection, but was furious if anyone else did not do the same. But his eye often looked in other directions, which was in many ways understandable. His mother, the Queen, would not allow him to take part in any political affairs, and kept everything possible secret from him. Somehow he had to fill his days and nights. It was only natural with his charm and high spirits that women should find him irresistible, not only because he was the Prince of Wales, but as a man. The prince had now fallen in love with the fascinating, charming, and popular Lady Brooke. Married to the heir of the Earl of Warwick, Daisy was loved by everyone. Even when she behaved in a way that most of society thought naughty and indiscreet, she was still admired and respected. At Easton Lodge, which was her home, she rode with skill and dash and gave a certain glamour to everything she touched. It was unfortunate that while Daisy, though now a young married woman, was still in many ways a child, she should have met a dashing and good-looking sailor. Lord Charles Beresford had made his name in the Royal Navy. Brought up in Ireland, he rode to hounds with boldness and imagination, and was experienced in driving a four-in-hand and offered to instruct Daisy in the art. The result of the affection they shared for horses was inevitable. The expression on the face of Lord Charles's wife grew sourer and sourer. It was within 5 years of her marriage that the beautiful Daisy was in love. She found another handsome sailor, who was a friend of the Prince of Wales, irresistible. Daisy was beautiful, but she was also reckless, as when she was in love she threw all caution to the wind. She learned that Lord Charles, who had told her he loved her to distraction, had given his wife a baby. Daisy then behaved exactly like an outraged child, and accused him in a letter of infidelity. This letter was the cause of a great deal of trouble. Although it was addressed to her husband, Lady Charles recognized the handwriting and opened it. Not unnaturally, she was livid with rage and showed the letter to the Prime Minister. He was too discreet to do anything about it, but Lady Charles was now threatening Daisy, who felt the one person who might help her was Charles's greatest friend, the Prince of Wales. Looking extremely pretty, even though she was somewhat flustered, Daisy called at Marlborough House. She poured out her story to the Prince of Wales, who was touched by the tears in her beautiful blue eyes and promised that he would help her. Of course, they saw a great deal of each other while they talked over what she could do, and planning how they could cajole Lady Charles into surrendering the damaging letter, which, by now, Daisy regretted she had ever written. Before the Prince of Wales had in any way helped with the situation, he had fallen in love with her. He was not just attracted to Daisy as he had been with the Jersey Lily and his other affairs. In his own words, he was moved by a deep emotion. Because he needed someone he trusted to talk about his feelings, he confided in the Marquis. While he was very sympathetic, the Marquis could only commiserate with him. He tried to take the prince's mind off love by talking about his gun, and he was horrified to find that Watson had disappeared. He was immediately convinced that the new young Kaiser was behind Watson's abduction. "We must do something about it, Irvin," he told the Marquis. "The best move you can possibly make is to go to Berlin and see for yourself what that young rascal is up to. I would not trust him further than I can see him." The Marquis agreed that there was no alternative, and made his plans accordingly. He returned to London from the Grand National at Aintree to find an intriguing letter awaiting him. It was from Baron von Honentaal. He had written to say that he had been informed that the Marquis was intending to visit Berlin and invited him to be his guest at his house. The Marquis was surprised at the invitation, although he remembered meeting the Baron on several occasions when he had been staying in London. Then, as he thought it over, it seemed to him almost providential. He had received an invitation from a man who was obviously very influential in Berlin. The Baron would undoubtedly invite him to meet a number of people who would be aware of the Emperor's ambitions for the German Imperial Navy. "I will accept," the Marquis told his secretary. "And as I wish to leave for Berlin tomorrow, or at the latest the next day, please inform the German embassy so that they can send my acceptance by their private wire, which is by far the quickest." "Of course," the secretary replied. "Your lordship's yacht is anchored in the Thames, ready to go to sea as soon as your lordship wishes it." The Marquis gave his orders. Then he remembered that Lady Sybil had pressed him to dine with her as soon as he returned from Aintree. This was something he had no intention of doing. "I will leave tomorrow after all," he decided, "so go to the embassy immediately." His secretary hurried to obey. The Marquis sent for his valet, who had been with him for several years, and told him where they were going. "Well, that's somewhere new, my lord," Dawkins said. Dawkins was a wiry little man who had found himself in some very difficult situations with the Marquis. He had always proved himself exceedingly resourceful, and was more than handy with a revolver or knife. The Marquis hesitated as to whether he should tell him why they were going. Then he remembered that servants' gossip was often more informative than anything he would hear in the dining room. "The reason why we are going, Dawkins," he said, "it's to see if we can find any sign of Mr. Watson." "I guess that was in the back of your mind, my lord," Dawkins replied. "I thinks all along that them Germans might be at the bottom of his disappearance." "What made you think that?" the Marquis inquired. "There's something about them I don't trust," Dawkins answered. "A friend of mine, who knows them well, says they're either at your feet or at your throat." "I have no need to tell you, Dawkins," the Marquis said, "that anything we do must be with the utmost secrecy, and no one must think we have any reason to visit Berlin except for a little sightseeing." Dawkins laughed. "I know that's the answer, my lord, and I'll tell them when I gets the chance what you brought back from your other travels, especially them jewels you found in India." The Marquis smiled. He had been given magnificent ropes of pearls in Bombay and diamonds from the diamond mine in Hyderabad. In addition, he had bought rubies and emeralds at what he knew was well under the market price. These had been added to the already very valuable Midhurst jewellery. It had passed through his mind that one day these beautiful jewels would look very becoming on his wife. He certainly had no intention of giving any of them to Lady Sybil, nor to any other beauty who was merely passing through his life. For these ladies, he visited one of the many jewellers in Bond Street, where he was always extremely generous. What he had acquired on his travels was to his mind an essential part of the family collection, which belonged to Hurst Castle, which was not only outstandingly elegant to see from outside, but exquisitely furnished within. It was a treasure trove which the Marquis enhanced and extended whenever opportunity arose. He had not only brought home jewellery from India and Persia, but pearls from the Gulf. He had acquired some very fine statues in Greece, which were the envy of all who inspected them. There had also been some remarkable carvings from remote parts of Africa, which museums had begged him for almost on their knees. He was, however, determined to make Hurst Castle richer than any museum in the world. It was true to say, he was not only thinking of himself, but was handing on something unique to posterity, and which came from his heart. His grandmother, to whom he was devoted, had said to him on her last visit to Hurst Castle, "All you need now, Irvin, dearest, is someone beautiful and delightful at the other end of your table, who will be the admiration of everyone who visits you." The Marquis remained silent as she continued. "I remember people saying to your mother that she was a perfect grande dame, and that, dear boy, is what you need. While, of course, the nursery, where I used to visit you as a child, is still very empty." "There is plenty of time for all that, grandmamma," the Marquis replied with a smile. He bent and kissed her cheek. When he walked away, she looked after him with sadness in her eyes. She knew, when no one else even remembered, how much it had hurt his pride when Elizabeth had run away with a man so inferior to himself. She had prayed ever since that he would forget the insult, and would find someone who would love him for himself, and not for his title and possessions. But how, she asked herself, could any woman truly separate the two worlds? From the time that his father had died, Irvin had been very much a marquis, taking control of his vast estate, the horses he owned, and everything else involved with a great title and heritage. "Is it too much to ask," the dowager told herself, "that any girl could ignore everything except that Irvin is a very attractive young man?" Yet she had fallen in love with his grandfather the first time she had met him, and he with her. It really had been a case of love at first sight, which most people believed only happened in novelettes. They had been ecstatically happy. Although no one would believe it in a world which today the dowager considered was fast and improper, they had neither of them been unfaithful. It was no use pretending she was not shocked by the behaviour of the Prince of Wales's Marlborough House set, which included her beloved grandson. Of course, he enjoyed the exciting evenings at Marlborough House, and the endless parties to which the Prince of Wales would insist on inviting his favourite beauty as one of the guests. At the moment, the dowager knew her grandson was also enjoying the Eastern Lodge house parties. She was told they were always arranged to provide the maximum amusement. A dozen guests were the usual number invited, and there was so much arranged for them. There would be riding, which the Marquis enjoyed, and driving over the estate. The dowager had been told often enough what happened after hunting or shooting in the winter. The ladies, looking like butterflies in glamorous long-sleeved tea-gowns, would be waiting in the gold and white drawing-room for the men to return. In the evening, they were always elaborately dressed in their tight-waisted, low-necked gowns. Every beauty glittered with diamonds and precious gems. The conversation was witty and amusing, and it seemed as if everyone was always laughing. "What is surprising," the dowager thought, "is that Irvine cannot find anyone as alluring as Daisy to reign in Hurst Castle." She worried constantly that her beloved Irvine would continue with his determination to remain unmarried. He had no brother. If by some mischance he died, the heir would be a cousin who was already over 50. "He must marry. He must," the dowager said again to herself as she walked to the window. The fountain in the garden was throwing its spray up towards the sun. It fell over the naked bronze figure of a goddess surrounded by cupids. The dowager looked at the statue for some time. She was praying, as she prayed every day, that her grandson would find himself a wife, but it seemed as if her prayers were to go unanswered. He was now going abroad. Although he had said nothing, she guessed that his affair with Lady Sybil Graham, of which she had been well aware, had come to an end. She realized that Lady Sybil was a widow and eager to marry him. However, she had what the dowager thought was a bad reputation. Yet she was a very beautiful woman, and the daughter of the Duke of Doncaster, so for those reasons she was highly suitable, except that the Marquis did not want her as his wife. The dowager knew him so well, and had doted on him ever since he was a baby. She had guessed, almost before he knew it himself, that this affaire de cour, which had been a fiery and tempestuous one, was coming to an end. She assumed that there was no one else on the horizon for the moment, otherwise he would not be going abroad. The dowager sighed deeply. "Please, God," she prayed, "find him a wife who will make him happy and who will love him for himself." She felt that her prayers were travelling up into the sky on the spray from the fountain. Then, as the sunshine glinted, she felt as if her prayers were being answered. As the water tumbled into the basin, it was as if God had heard her. Chapter 3. Having made his plans to leave for Berlin, the Marquis felt in no particular hurry to depart. He disliked the flurry and scurry which took place in his house when the master was planning to go abroad. There was always panic about things forgotten and remembered at the last moment. He therefore descended for breakfast at 9 o'clock. He informed his secretary that he would leave at 10 o'clock to join his yacht. There were a number of letters for him to sign before his departure. His secretary required him to decide when he would return and which invitations he would accept before the end of the month. Having finished his breakfast, the Marquis walked to his desk where he signed a number of letters and cheques. He was just about to leave when the door opened and the butler announced, "Lady Sybil Graham, my lord." The Marquis looked up in astonishment. He had never known Lady Sybil to rise early. He could not believe it was not a mistake until she came sailing into the room. Looking exceedingly beautiful and dressed in a most elaborate and glamorous velvet gown, she was wearing a hat quivering with ostrich feathers. "Sybil," the Marquis exclaimed, "why are you here at this hour?" "Need you ask that question?" she replied. "I could not believe that you would think of going abroad without saying goodbye to me." The Marquis realized at once that he had told her about his plans in the note he had written the previous evening to say he could not dine with her. "I have something very important to accomplish in Berlin," he stated a little lamely as he rose to his feet. "How could you be so cruel," Lady Sybil asked, "as to make me wonder why you could not at least dine with me before your departure?" "I arrived home late, and quite frankly I was very tired," the Marquis answered. "Too tired for me?" Lady Sybil questioned. She moved a little nearer to him. She was looking up at him with an expression in her eyes that he knew so well. Her lips were parted provocatively. "I love you, Irvine," she breathed. "You know I love you, and I can't allow you to leave me." She waited for him to put his arms round her. When he did not do so, she moved even closer. "What is the attraction in Berlin that makes you hurry there so unexpectedly?" she demanded. "Could it possibly be a woman who is the attraction?" The Marquis smiled. "I can answer that quite honestly. As far as I know, I am not meeting any woman in Berlin." "Then allow me to come with you," Lady Sybil pleaded. She hardly spoke above a whisper, and the Marquis stared at her in astonishment. Then he recognized quite clearly it was a trap. If he did travel to Berlin with Lady Sybil, he would be obliged on his return to ask her to marry him. Firmly he moved away from her to stand in front of the fireplace. "I think you must be aware, Sybil, that it would be very indiscreet of us to go anywhere abroad together. As it so happens, I am to meet the Kaiser on behalf of the Prince of Wales." "I do not believe you," Lady Sybil responded. "You have never behaved like this before, and I want you to stay at least until tomorrow or the day after." When he did not answer, she moved swiftly across the room towards him. As she reached him, she placed her arms around his neck. "I love you, she sighed, "and I will not let you go." Then her lips were on his, and her body moved closer. He could feel her heart beating. As she kissed him, he knew beyond question that as far as he was concerned, their liaison was finished. He had even found her conversation boring. Yet it had been impossible for him not to be moved by the passionate insistence of her lips and the quivering of her body when she became excited. Now, somewhat to his surprise, he felt nothing. Nothing but a desire to get away from her as quickly as he could. Gently, because he did not wish to hurt her more than was necessary, he moved her arms from around his neck. Holding her away from her, he said, "It is too early in the morning, Sybil, for such a demonstration of affection. I have to depart now, otherwise I shall be late arriving in Hamburg, where I am to catch the train to Berlin. You are very beautiful, and very alluring, and I am sure that in my absence there will be at least a dozen gentlemen wishing to tell you so." Lady Sybil did not reply. She just looked at him, her eyes very wide. She was enough of a woman of the world to understand what was happening without the Marquis saying any more. He was saying goodbye, not just for this journey, but forever. Then, because she could not stop herself, she reached out towards him as he turned towards the door. "Wait! Irvin, wait!" she implored. "I have something to tell you. Something I must talk to you about." "I am sorry, Sybil," the Marquis replied, "but I must go. Take care of yourself." He pulled open the door as he spoke and left the room. He did not close the door. Lady Sybil could hear his footsteps moving down the passage towards the hall. She made an exclamation and stamped her foot furiously. She knew she had lost him. She had lost the man who had meant more to her than any other man she had ever known, the man she had been determined to marry. "What has happened?" she asked herself. "What has occurred to make him change so quickly and so unexpectedly?" She felt an impulse to run after him. She would plead with him once more to stay with her, if only for another hour or two, but she knew it was hopeless. She could hardly make sense in front of the servants. If she did, there was nothing which would irritate the Marquis more. She stamped her foot again. Then she walked to a gilt-framed mirror which hung over a chest on the wall. She stared at her own reflection, asking herself how, when she was so beautiful, he could possibly refuse her. Why was he no longer captivated by her? She had been so certain that he was completely in her power. It was only a question of time before he would ask her to marry him. She had been completely convinced that he would. She had spent a considerable amount of money, which she could not afford, knowing that the Marquis, when they married, could very easily pay all her bills. Now she had lost him, and she was deeply in debt. She had no idea of what the future might hold for her. "I hate him for treating me in this disgraceful fashion," she stormed. She wondered what she could do to make him aware of how much he had hurt her. She had joined the ranks of a number of women who declared that the Marquis had left them with a broken heart, and who had never ceased to regret they were no longer close to him. "I hate him! I hate him!" Lady Sybil cried aloud angrily. Then, as if she needed to relive her feelings, she picked up a piece of Dresden china which stood on one of the side tables. She flung it onto the floor, where it shattered into a large number of pieces. She looked at the wreckage, thinking dramatically that it was exactly what the Marquis had done to her heart, Holding her head high, she walked out of the room, and when she reached the hall, she found that the Marquis had already left. Her carriage was waiting outside. Lady Sybil swept past the footmen, who looked at each other knowingly. One of them winked at the other. It was the butler who showed her ladyship to her carriage, and bowed politely as she drove away. As he walked back into the house, he thought to himself, "That's another one gone, and a good thing too. She weren't right for the master, and that's the truth." The Marquis found his yacht, the Seahorse, moored and waiting for him by the Houses of Parliament, and stepped aboard. The captain welcomed him, and there was no doubt of his sincerity when he said, "I am delighted to see you, my lord, and it's splendid to greet your lordship aboard again." "Thank you, Captain, and I think the weather is right for sailing," the Marquis replied. A few minutes later, the engines began to turn, and the Seahorse moved into the centre of the River Thames. The Marquis thought that he should spend more of his time at sea. He loved his yacht. It had performed outstandingly well at Cowes last year, against all the other yachts. Only the Kaiser's could match it. As he climbed up to the bridge, he was thinking of Watson, and how he could possibly find him in Berlin. In fact, he told himself it was really like looking for a needle in a haystack. If the Germans had kidnapped him, which he believed very probable, he could by this time be anywhere, unless the Kaiser wanted him directly under his eye. The Marquis was certain that the Germans would be determined to obtain details of the gun if they suspected it was superior to the weapons on their own ships. Even so, he could not help thinking the story was too far-fetched to be true. How could the Kaiser, tiresome and boastful though he might be, really stoop to spiriting away a citizen of another nation? He might think Watson had invented a weapon Germany did not possess, but kidnapping was not what was expected of an emperor. Yet, if this was not the case, where had Watson gone? If, for an instance, he was attending the deathbed of some relative, why had he not communicated with anyone since his disappearance? The Marquis was keenly aware that Watson shared his enthusiasm for their invention. He was absolutely certain they had produced a potential weapon of war, which no other country had conceived, much less put into operation. How could the Germans have learned what we were working on? The Marquis repeatedly asked himself. But if somehow they had found out about the gun, there was no doubt that it was something the Kaiser would insist on possessing. Bombastic, greedy, and determined to be more successful than his uncle, to display the gun would undoubtedly be a triumph the Kaiser could not readily resist. If he is holding Watson, the Marquis thought, then I have first to find where he is hidden, and secondly, in some discreet and magical way, spirit him back to England. It was very much easier said than done. In fact, the Marquis had not the slightest idea as to how he could achieve his objective. The sea was calm, and the sun was shining. As he always enjoyed being at sea, he spent as much of the day as possible on the bridge. The captain kept the Seahorse well out to sea, and in consequence they did not see much shipping before they neared the coast of Germany. The Marquis decided to spend the night aboard and not enter the estuary of the Elbe River until the next morning. The captain was delighted. He wished the Marquis would stay on board as long as possible and find a bay without any difficulty where they could anchor. The Marquis had no wish to go ashore. He ate an excellent dinner provided by his chef and returned on deck. He was looking not at the lights of Germany, but out to the North Sea. Inevitably, he was thinking of how he could find Watson. He had come to no conclusion before he decided it was time to retire. It was only when he was actually in bed, which was very large and comfortable, that he thought of Lady Sybil. He wondered if she would be difficult in the future. He was well aware that she was very possessive. He appreciated that he had escaped her for the moment, but she might be waiting for him when he returned. If he intended to stay in London, it would be very difficult to evade her. If I do not find Watson, I may as well stay on the yacht and travel to the Mediterranean, he decided. Then he remembered his racehorses, and that there were several race meetings for which they were entered before Royal Ascot. As he had missed winning the Grand National, he was all the more determined to achieve the Gold Cup. He was quite certain he owned a horse which could win the race. If he could engage Nightingale, he would have the right jockey. It was something he had not thought of until now. He wished he had spoken to Nightingale after the Grand National. He expected quite a lot of owners would be trying to get him to ride for them, but he doubted if any of them would own better horses than his. "I must see to this matter the moment I return," he told himself. He hoped he would not be too late. Then, as he turned over on his pillow, he was worrying again about Watson. When the Marquis awoke in the morning, the engines were still silent. It was only after he had finished breakfast that they started up, and the Seahorse slowly moved towards the estuary of the Elbe. It did not take long to reach Hamburg. There, the Marquis was obliged to leave the yacht and travel to the railway station. Before departing, he gave his final instructions to the captain. Then, accompanied only by Dawkins and a courier, who had organised his travelling arrangements, he caught a cab to the station. When the Marquis was travelling on a long railway journey, he would arrange for his own drawing-room to be attached to the express. It was in many ways superior, even to the one owned by Queen Victoria. However, it was only a short distance from Hamburg to Berlin. It had therefore not been worth the trouble of bringing the drawing-room carriage from Calais, where it was kept. At the same time, the Marquis remembered how much the Kaiser enjoyed pomp and circumstance. He might have been more impressed if he had arrived in his own drawing-room. He recognized that the Kaiser regarded him with suspicion, because he was such a close friend of the Prince of Wales. The Prince always liked to be surrounded by men younger than himself. There was no doubt that all the most amusing men and the most beautiful women found their way to Marlborough House. In fact, the Marlborough House set was not only talked about, but envied throughout Europe. On the other hand, the Kaiser at the new palace gave large and formal dinner parties, which were exceedingly boring. He did all the talking. The court balls, which were undoubtedly impressive and glittering, were dull and dreary occasions. "I think I am wise," the Marquis told himself as the train neared Berlin, "to have accepted the invitation of Baron von Honentaal. Unless I have been misinformed, he owns a magnificent collection of pictures and furniture. Also, in his house, I may meet men who do not have to kiss the Kaiser's feet all the time. One of them might be able to give me a clue on Watson's whereabouts." He was quite certain he would learn nothing of any use at the palace. Everyone was terrified of the Kaiser, and always looked over their shoulders before they spoke. The courier, who had met the Marquis at Hamburg, had arranged for a carriage to meet him at Berlin to convey him to the Baron's house. The Marquis had not informed his host of his exact time of arrival, as he preferred to travel under his own steam. It was a lovely day. Berlin, with its trees, its woods, and its shining river, looked very beautiful. The Marquis observed that the houses seemed to have increased considerably in number since his last visit. Like Simona, he thought Berlin was a city of palaces. The roads were wider than in any other capital city, with the possible exception of St. Petersburg. When he first saw the Baron's house, he was extremely impressed, as was the intention. It certainly looked like a palace. It was also large enough, the Marquis thought with a smile, to be an army barracks. There were a great number of servants to welcome him when he arrived. He was taken down a corridor lined with priceless pictures to a drawing-room where he was received by the Baroness. "My husband informed me that you were coming to stay with us, my lord," she said as she greeted the Marquis. "But we were upset that we did not know the time of your arrival, and therefore could not send our carriage to the station to meet you." "I would not wish to put you to so much trouble," the Marquis replied politely. He thought she must have been a good-looking woman when she was young, but now she had definitely lost her figure, and her hair had begun to turn grey. She was, however, very friendly, and asked after various members of the Marquis's family whom she had met when she had been staying in London. She also inquired under the health of Queen Victoria, adding how the Germans were impressed that she had reigned for so long and was such a great monarch. The Marquis answered her questions politely. He was somehow relieved when the Baron arrived. He too greeted the Marquis most effusively, repeating several times how delighted he was to welcome him to Berlin. "I feel quite certain, my lord," he continued, "that you will be more comfortable here than you would be at your own embassy, which is rather cramped, or with our emperor, who had not yet finished renovating the new palace since he had moved in." "I have heard that he has made a great many improvements," the Marquis remarked. "It was certainly needed," the Baron replied. "Even now it is a mumbo-jumbo of good and bad muddled together." He spoke rather scathingly. As he most certainly would not have done had the Kaiser been present. The Marquis hoped that perhaps he would be lucky enough to find that the Baron was sympathetic towards him if he admitted to him frankly the real reason for his visit to Berlin. Equally, he knew he must be careful not to make a mistake, as he could make everything even more difficult than it was already. "Tell me about the new palace," he asked the Baron. "The last time I was in Berlin, the Kaiser was using the old palace, which I believed he disliked." "Personally," the Baroness said before her husband could speak, "I think he made a great mistake, but as you are well aware, everyone is far too frightened to argue with the Emperor." "You must judge for yourself," the Baron said. "There are 200 rooms in the palace, and the private apartments of their Majesties number about 58. "I believe they have some exceptionally fine treasures in the palace," the Marquis suggested. "That is true," the Baron agreed. "There are all kinds of bibelots and curios, magnificent pieces of buhl and quaint examples of Rococo work, which past generations of the royal Hohenzollerns hoarded." "I should certainly like to see them," the Marquis said. "Which I am sure you will," the Baron replied, "as soon as His Majesty learns that you have arrived. But, for the moment, I hope you will enjoy your hospitality, as we are giving a dinner party for you tonight." "That is very kind of you," the Marquis murmured. "Among our guests," the Baron announced, choosing his words carefully, "is one of the most beautiful women in Germany. I do not know whether you have ever met her." The Marquis did not reply. He thought few German women were beautiful, and waited to hear more. "Her name," the Baron said rather ponderously, "is Countess Simona von Honentaal." The Marquis shook his head. No, I don't think I have, but I will be very interested to do so. I shall be very surprised," the Baron added, "if you do not find her most alluring. The Emperor himself is a great admirer of hers. In fact, her portrait is among those of the most beautiful which stand on his writing table." The Marquis was amused. He had been told that among the portraits of beautiful women which the Kaiser collected was one of the Duchess of Aosta, formerly Laetitia Bonaparte. Her portrait was remarkable for the fact that Her Imperial Highness's ample bust was uncovered, except for a collar of pear-shaped pearls. The Marquis thought it was a strange possession to exhibit to the world, and wondered if he would have a chance to see it on his visit. "Now, I would like to show you some of my treasures," the Baron offered, "and while we are doing so, my wife will order English tea for you, which I am sure you will find it difficult to go without." The Marquis did not contradict this statement. He was just about to follow the Baron from the room when two young girls appeared. They were both attractive, he thought. The Baron introduced the first one as his daughter, Karoline, and the Marquis shook her hand. He thought that for a German she was unusually pretty, without being as heavy in the body as so many were. Then, as the Baron brought forward the second girl, he realized at a glance that she was English. "This is Simona Bell, who was at school with my daughter," the Baron announced. "I expect you know her father, Lord Belgrave." "Yes, of course," the Marquis replied. He stretched out his hand towards Simona. As he touched her, he was surprised that her fingers were trembling. He held her hand a little longer than was necessary, as if to reassure her. As he looked into her large and beautiful blue eyes, he realized that there was a fear in them which he did not understand. She was indeed very lovely. Her features were small and perfect. Her eyes, which seemed abnormally large, dominated her pointed face. He knew a great deal about beautiful women, but it struck him that there was something about this girl that was different. What it was he could not for the moment explain to himself. "We have been out shopping," Karoline was saying, "and Simona has bought some presents for her father and mother for when she returns home." "That is something I am hoping she will not do for a long time," the Baron said. "We like having you here, Simona, and I am sure it will be nice for you to have a fellow countryman with whom you can talk English, even though I know that your German is almost perfect." "That is a compliment that would delight my father," Simona replied. As she spoke, the Marquis thought her voice was soft, musical, and very attractive. He had not expected to find an English girl in this German household, especially one as lovely as Simona Bell. He saw her looking at him, and again there was a strange expression in her eyes, and he was sure it was one of fear, although he could not imagine why she should be afraid. How was it possible that this young girl, who could not be more than 18, was frightened of him? And why? He could not, of course, speak to her alone over tea, but he did, however, ask after her father and why she had come to Berlin. "I expect you know," Simona replied, "that Papa has been a great traveller in his time. He suggested that staying at Karoline's home in Berlin was an opportunity I should not miss." "Are you enjoying Berlin?" the Marquis inquired. "I have only just arrived, so I have not seen much yet," Simona answered. "But I find it is a city of palaces, and quite different from any other city I have ever visited." Just as they were finishing tea, the butler announced the Countess von Tassen. A vision swept into the room. As the gentlemen rose to their feet, the Countess held out both hands towards the Baron in a theatrical gesture. "It is so kind of you to ask me to stay," she gushed. "And I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to be here." She turned to say almost the same thing to the Baroness. She showed as she did so the sinuous curves of her figure, which made the feathers in her hat flutter as if they were birds about to take flight. It reminded the Marquis of the hat that Sybil had been wearing when she had tried to prevent him from leaving London. The Baron introduced him to the Countess. It was then that the Marquis guessed with a cynical twist to his lips exactly why she was here. She placed her hand in his, and as he raised it perfunctorily towards his lips, he felt her fingers tighten on his. When he met her eyes, he knew that she was telling him wordlessly what so many women had already told him. It did not need an expression of disapproval on the Baroness's face to surmise that the Countess was no friend of hers. The Baron was paying the Countess compliments. He was making sure that the Marquis was aware of how privileged they were that she was included as a guest. The Countess sat down near the tea table, and the Baron beckoned to the Marquis to sit beside her. She accepted a cup of tea, but refused anything to eat. Turning towards the Marquis, she said in English, "I have always longed to meet you. I have been told that you are the most handsome and most attractive gentleman in London." "I cannot imagine," the Marquis replied, his eyes twinkling, "where you could have heard such nonsense." "But it is true," the Countess insisted. "I rather suspected my friends were exaggerating, but now I have met you, I know that they have told me the truth." Her eyes, which were flecked with green, met his. He knew exactly what she was saying to him, and what she expected. The Marquis was far too clever not to guess that there was some special reason why the Countess had been invited to meet him. However, it did not seem possible that it could in any way be connected with his quest. Yet he was sure it was not by chance that he and the Countess Zivana were guests of the Baron von Honentaal at the same time. "What have you planned for us tonight, my dear Baron?" the Countess asked, speaking in German. "What could I do?" the Baron answered, "when I am entertaining the most beautiful woman in Germany, but invite the most intelligent and charming gentleman to meet her." "That sounds delightful," the Countess enthused. "And as you have invited the Marquis of Midhurst, it should be a very amusing evening." "That is what I hope," the Baron replied. "And, as the girls will want to dance, I thought we should do so after dinner. Not a big party, but just one which will be romantic and entertaining." He was not looking at his daughter as he spoke, but at the Countess. Once again the Marquis's eyes were twinkling. What could be a quicker way of creating a romance than he should hold this exquisite paragon of a woman in his arms, undoubtedly to the strains of a Johann Strauss waltz and other romantic music from Vienna? "The scene is set," he told himself. "Now I have to wait and discover what this drama is all about." He was still puzzled when later he went to dress for dinner, which was early by English customs. He was perfectly aware that everything had been planned for his benefit. The Baron had said it was the girls who wanted to dance, but it was obviously a surprise to them. "We are going to dance, Papa," Karoline had cried. "You did not tell me. That is something I have been longing to do ever since I came home. I suppose you can dance the latest waltzes and all the dances which have become popular since I was a boy?" the Baron asked. "Of course I can," Karoline replied. "But Simona was the best dancer in the whole school, and everyone agreed that it was she who should have won the music prize that was awarded at the end of term." "Then you must certainly dance with me this evening, Simona," the Baron offered. "I will be delighted," Simona answered. "But personally, I think Karoline dances much better than I do." "Now you are being ridiculously modest," Karoline protested. "Tonight there will be gentlemen who can judge for themselves, and I hope, Papa, that you have asked lots of them to join us." "I certainly have," the Baron replied, "and I have also included some very attractive young women, so you two girls had better look to your laurels." Karoline gave a cry. "I shall wear my best gown, and Simona will wear hers." "But of course, we shall need a hairdresser, and I expect the Countess will too." "He has already been ordered," the Baron said, spreading his hands. "I assure you that your mother and I have thought of every detail to make this evening a success, and I shall be very disappointed indeed if you are not at all satisfied." He looked at the Marquis as he spoke. "That is very kind of you, Baron," he said. "You should not have gone to so much trouble on my account. But I enjoy dancing, and balls are very popular in London at this moment." "So I have heard," the Baron replied. "But we must do our best to beat London, as I believe we do when it comes to music." The Countess rose to her feet. "As we are going to be so energetic tonight," she said, "I am going to rest. As you can quite understand, my dear Baron, I want to look my best for your charming guest, who must take a good report of Berlin back to Queen Victoria." "We must make sure that he does," the Baron agreed. "But I have a suspicion his report will go to the Prince of Wales." As if the Countess realized she had made a mistake, she made a little exclamation. "But of course," she said, "your handsome, dashing prince, who has every tongue talking. I cannot tell you how much I want to meet him. Perhaps if you invite me to stay with you in London, she will be able to arrange it?" She looked up at the Marquis with her green eyes as she spoke. He thought she was moving a little faster than he expected. The Countess placed her hand on his arm. "We will talk about it tonight," she purred softly. Then, turning with a flurry of her skirts, she reached the door. As she departed, she gave the Baron a knowing glance, which should have meant nothing to anyone but him. Yet because he was extremely observant, the Marquis had noticed her expression. He knew, although he could not think why, that something was being set up which would affect him. "I do not understand," he said to himself. At the same time, because the whole scenario was so unusual, he was intrigued. Chapter 4. Karoline was very excited at the prospect of a dinner party and dancing. She rushed to Simona's room to show off her gown. It was a pretty, though quite ordinary dress, but more grown up than anything Karoline had worn at school. Simona's gown had been chosen by her mother last winter for her first hunt ball. It was, of course, white and simple enough to be worn by a young girl. At the same time, it framed Simona's beauty and her exquisite figure perfectly. When she walked into the drawing-room before dinner, the Marquis thought she resembled a young goddess. She might have just stepped down from Mount Olympus. The Countess was determined to make a dramatic entrance. She therefore did not make her appearance until the other guests had all arrived. They were all drinking and laughing when she swept into the room. For a moment, there was a sudden silence, which any actress knows is the greatest compliment she can receive. The Countess certainly cut a dash. Her gown was green to match her eyes. Peacock feathers were sewn onto her full skirt and encircled her bare shoulders. There were emeralds around her neck and in her ears. More peacock feathers were arranged in her dark hair. It was the Baron who first clapped his hands at her appearance, followed by all the gentlemen. "Magnificent!" he exclaimed. "No one could look more glamorous nor more beautiful." He introduced her to the other guests. The men kissed her hand, but the ladies were not so effusive. They were obviously irritated to find that they could not compete with her. When they moved into dinner, the Countess sat on the right of the Baron, and the Marquis was on her other side. Simona had half expected that because she was English, she would have been seated next to the Marquis. She hoped that if she was, she would be able to tell him that she had something of great importance to impart. This might have made it possible for her somehow to be alone with him later. However, she found herself at the other end of the table, with young German officers on either side of her. They made themselves charming, and were most attentive. At the same time, Simona could not help watching what seemed to be a drama unfolding at the other end of the table. The Countess was determined to be the focus of attention for every man within reach, especially the Marquis. Simona noticed that she was flirting with him in a manner her mother would have considered totally outrageous. The Baron was encouraging her. Simona could only hope that he would not be duped, yet because the Countess was so beautiful, it would be quite understandable if the Marquis was indeed caught in her clutches. In which case, Simona told herself, he will not listen to me or anything that I have to tell him. The dinner was well prepared but heavy, and there was rather too much of it, and the same applied to the wine. When at last the dessert was placed on the table, and liqueurs were offered to the gentlemen, it was already after 10 o'clock. "I hope we are going to dance soon," Karoline urged in a low voice. "Some of these officers have to return to their barracks by midnight." As if the Baron heard her, or perhaps guessed what she was saying, he suggested, "Why don't you young people go to the ballroom and start dancing? The band is waiting for you, and we older folk will join you a little later." Karoline sprang to her feet eagerly. So did the younger ladies, including some who were married, and she led the way from the dining room along the passage to the ballroom, which was large and impressive. There was a stand decorated with flowers, on which the band was waiting for their arrival, and as soon as they appeared, they struck up a vigorous waltz. Simona found herself swept onto the floor by one of the officers who had sat next to her at dinner. He was a good dancer, and the band was excellent. They had obviously been told to play sentimental music, and as many waltzes by Strauss as possible. They were just starting another waltz when the Baron entered the ballroom with the Countess, and the Marquis just behind him. He looked with approval at the young dancers, who were selecting their partners before saying, "Although, Countess, I am longing to dance with you, I think for this beautiful waltz you should be in the arms of the most distinguished visitor." He was looking at the Marquis as he spoke. There was nothing he could do but take the Countess out onto the dance floor, thinking as he did so that the Baron was overdoing it. He was making it all too obvious what he expected from a meeting between himself and the Countess, who was reputedly the most beautiful woman in Germany, and she was making it clear that she approved of the way the Baron was directing affairs. As they began to dance, she moved a little closer to the Marquis than was necessary and said, "I have been so much looking forward to this dance. I knew that you would be a perfect dancer, and we must have been made for each other." The way she spoke, and the expression in her eyes, made the Marquis feel he was being pushed in one direction far too quickly and too heavily. It is always the same with Germans, he thought. There is no delicacy about anything they do. If the Countess had been French, he would have been trying to flirt with her rather than her making all the running. He had always disliked the obvious. Where women were concerned, he liked, as most men, to do his own hunting. What puzzled him was what the Baron was expecting to gain from this situation. He was thrusting him into a deep flirtation with the Countess, and why was she so eager to play the part assigned to her? As they waltzed around the room, Simona felt that the Marquis had already been caught in the trap the Baron had set for him, and whatever she might tell him, he would refuse to believe it. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" her partner asked. "Anyone as beautiful as you should always be smiling." "I am enjoying the dancing," Simona replied, "and I think the music is delightful." "So are you," her partner said. "So delightful that I want to talk to you alone. And I am sure that it is warm enough for us to go into the garden?" Simona, however, had been told by her mother that no debutante should venture alone into a garden or a conservatory with a man. "Do you mean, Mamma," Simona had asked, "that he might try to kiss her?" "I would be surprised if he did not," Lady Belgrave had replied. "But what is more important is that the girl in question, especially if she is a debutante, would earn herself a bad reputation." Simona understood that this was something every young unmarried lady must avoid at all costs. When she reflected on the subject later, it seemed strange that this problem did not seem to worry married women, especially those who were part of the Marlborough House set, although they did not particularly interest her. Yet she could not help hearing at her mother's luncheon and tea parties the gossip about the Prince of Wales, who everyone wished to talk about. They all criticised unmercifully whichever woman was attracting him at any particular moment. Simona had received a lecture from her mother on how she should behave when she went to stay in Berlin with her friend. So therefore, she informed her partner that she had no wish to move into the garden, nor to leave the ballroom. As if he found Simona disappointing, he asked one of the married ladies for the next dance. To Simona's amusement, they disappeared into the garden halfway through the next waltz. She had no idea that while she was surreptitiously watching the Marquis, he had been equally interested in her. He noticed that she was behaving in a very circumspect manner, as was expected of a well-bred debutante. He could not say the same of most of the other young ladies present, who had drunk a great deal of champagne. They were now not only dancing in a somewhat abandoned fashion, but were being very noisy about it. The Marquis felt that as Simona was the same nationality as himself, he should ask her for a dance, but he found it difficult to escape from the Countess. She appeared to be clinging to him, whether they were on the dance floor or waiting for the music to start up again. It was with difficulty that he managed, because it was polite, to ask the Baroness for a dance. She had been watching the dancers from a comfortable chair, and at the Marquis's invitation she rose to her feet. "I would love to dance with you," she said, "as it is something I have not done for a long time, and you must forgive me if I am not as experienced as your last partner." Undoubtedly, there was a hard note in her voice when she referred to the Countess, and as the Marquis led her onto the floor, he asked her quietly, "Tell me about the Countess von Tassen. I have not heard of her before." "She is, as you can see," the Baroness replied, "extremely good-looking, and my husband insists that she is the most beautiful woman in Germany." She spoke with a sharp tone in her voice. Then, when she noticed that the Marquis was waiting for further information, she continued. "Her mother was Russian, which is why she looks different and is different in many ways. Her father was German, as was her husband." "What has happened to the Count?" the Marquis inquired casually. "He disappeared some years ago," the Baroness replied, "and, as by now you must be aware, the Countess boasts a great number of men wishing to look after her." Now there was no doubt that the Baroness's voice was scornful, and that she deeply disapproved of the Countess. The Marquis could appreciate without being told that she resented such a woman in her house, but the Baron had insisted. He waltzed the Baroness a little further round the dance floor, and then asked her, "Is the Countess accepted at the palace?" "Any woman is accepted to the Emperor if she has beautiful hands," the Baroness replied. "Hands?" the Marquis echoed in surprise. "It is something he is obsessed with," the Baroness smiled. "Perhaps it is understandable, considering he only has one good arm." The Marquis was silent for a moment before commenting. "It seems a very strange obsession, and one I have never come across." "You will certainly hear about it whilst you are in Berlin," the Baroness said, "and my husband will tell you more than I can." The Marquis thought this was a strange statement, and would have liked to know more. The dance finished, and he escorted the Baroness back to her chair. As he did so, he thought that now was a good moment to ask Simona for a dance. But just as he turned away from the Baroness, the Countess appeared at his side. "Now you must dance with me again," she insisted, flashing her large eyes. "My last partner was a stumbling cripple compared with you." As the Marquis somewhat reluctantly placed his arm around her waist, she added, "I told you that we were a match for each other on the dance floor, and in a great many other, more exciting ways as well." It was quite clear to him what she meant by exciting ways, and he felt even more strongly than he had felt earlier in the evening that he was being pushed. It was all too soon, and too obvious. So much for the German way of doing things at the double, and not giving a man time to think. He withdrew his hand from the Countess's, and raised it to his mouth as if to prevent a yawn. "To tell you the truth," he ventured, I would have enjoyed this party more if it had taken place tomorrow night. I am tired after my travels, and although I slept aboard my yacht last night, I did not sleep very well." "The sea was rough?" the Countess inquired. "It was indeed," the Marquis replied untruthfully. "And I always find a train journey exhausting." "So do I," the Countess agreed, "which is something else we have in common." She gave a little sigh. "I can understand, my dear Marquis, that tonight you need your beauty sleep. But tomorrow is another day. I shall have so much to say to you, and so much to learn from you." The Marquis thought he had pulled that one off rather successfully, but at the same time he disliked the way the Countess was looking at him. He was quite certain that she regarded him as a fish that had taken the bait and could not escape. A quarter of an hour before midnight, the young officers left for their barracks, and this was an excuse for the others to leave as well. As she started to say goodbye to her guests, the Baroness turned to her daughter and said, "Caroline, I think you and Simona should go to bed at once. You have many exciting plans for tomorrow, and I do not want either of you to be overtired." "Very well, Mamma," Caroline agreed obediently. "It has been such a lovely evening." She turned to bid farewell to one particular young man she had been dancing with more than anyone else, and Simona heard him telling her that he wanted to see her again. He would call tomorrow afternoon and hoped that she would be at home. "Wherever we go for luncheon," Caroline responded eagerly, "we will be back by 4 o'clock, so do come for tea." "I will very happily accept," he replied. Simona was halfway up the stairs when Caroline joined her. "It has been a wonderful evening," Caroline enthused, "and everybody thought you looked so lovely." "I thought the band was excellent," Simona said. "It is the first time they have been here, and I am sure that Papa will engage them again." As they reached their rooms, Caroline kissed Simona and said, "It is so lovely to have you stay, and we have many more thrilling adventures to plan." "I am looking forward to every one of them," Simona replied. She walked to her own bedroom, which was next to Caroline's. As she opened her door, she looked back to see the Marquis coming up the stairs. He turned at the top and walked in the opposite direction. Standing just inside the doorway of her bedroom, Simona watched him until he opened a door at the far end of the corridor. As the Marquis entered his room, a maid peeped out on the other side of the passage, as if she was looking for someone. Simona guessed that she was the lady's maid to the Countess, which meant that the Countess was sleeping directly opposite the Marquis. As the Marquis closed the door of his bedroom behind him, Simona was sure that his valet would be inside waiting for him. She knew that at home, her father's valet always waited for him, and her mother's lady's maid would be similarly in attendance. The same system would apply in this house, except that as she had arrived without a lady's maid, she was sharing Caroline's. She entered her bedroom, and a few minutes later there was a knock on the door, and Caroline's maid came in to undo her gown. "You must be tired," Simona said in her best German. "I am afraid we are very late this evening." "I often have to wait up late, Fräulein," the maid replied, "but one gets used to it. I am sure that neither you nor Fräulein Caroline will wish to be called too early tomorrow morning." "That is true," Simona smiled, "and thank you for your help." The maid hung her gown in the wardrobe, saying as she did so, "Everyone below stairs has been saying that you were the prettiest lady at the dinner table tonight, and I can assure you, Fräulein, they are very critical." "I can hardly believe that," Simona replied, "when the Countess von Tassen looked so fantastic." "Oh, her," the maid exclaimed scornfully. "We all hear a great deal about her, and most of it not to her advantage." "Why not?" Simona asked. The maid looked towards the door as if she was afraid someone might be listening. Then she lowered her voice. "She is a bad Frau. Very bad, and she should not be allowed in a respectable house like this." Simona was astonished. It was what she had felt herself, but she did not expect the German maid to think so too. As if she felt she had said too much, the maid added, "That is something I should not say, Fräulein, and I beg of you not to repeat it to the Baroness or Fräulein Caroline. No, of course not. Anything you say to me, Maria, is a secret." The maid smiled at her. Walking towards the door, she bade Simona good night, saying, "May the angels watch over you, because, Fräulein, you look like one." Simona smiled to herself. At the same time, she was surprised that Maria had been so outspoken about the Countess. She must be a very bad woman for Maria to say so much, she thought. Again, she was worrying about the Marquis. He might not understand what was going on, and after all, the Countess was very beautiful. I must warn him, she told herself, still wondering how it was possible. Suppose that tonight he visited the Countess's room. It seemed incredible that he should contemplate anything so forward on such a short acquaintance. Yet, if he did, she might wheedle out of him the secret of the gun that the Baron and Karl were so interested in. I must somehow prevent him from going to her tonight, Simona told herself. She wondered again how she could. Although there had been no time to explore much of the house, she remembered that Karoline had told her. Every room on the guest floor where she was sleeping had its own sitting room attached. You mean what we would call a boudoir? Simona had asked. In England, only the most important guests are given one, and perhaps in big houses there are one or two for their most distinguished visitors. My grandfather, who built this house, Karoline said, wanted it to be as imposing as a palace. I am sure he visualized it, full of aristocrats who would need a sitting room where they could write letters and read, and of course to receive anyone who wanted to talk to them privately. Because she had only just arrived and had so much to think about and see, Simona had not yet opened the communicating door of her bedroom. She picked up an oil lamp from the table and carried it with her. The sitting room was as large as her bedroom and well furnished. There were even 2 or 3 pictures on the walls which Simona was sure were painted by great artists. She opened a door on the other side of the room, which she thought would lead into another bedroom, and was not mistaken. It was a bedroom almost identical to her own, with a communicating door on the other side. Simona crossed the room she had just entered. She continued walking from bedroom to sitting room and into the next bedroom without having to step into the corridor. As she reached what must have been the 7th or 8th room from her bedroom, she thought she could hear voices. She stopped beside the communicating door. With a feeling of shock, she thought she was too late, as she realized that the man she could hear was the Marquis, and he was speaking in English. She held her breath as she listened for someone to answer him. Then to her relief, it was not a woman's voice, but a man's. I hope you have all your wants, my lord, the man said. And what time does your lordship wish to be called? 8 o'clock will suit me fine, the Marquis replied. And I hope, Dawkins, that we are looking after you properly. I mustn't grumble, my lord, Dawkins replied. But them Germans stuffs themselves like pigs, and there ain't many pretty manners below stairs, I can tell you. The Marquis laughed. I have not heard that before, but, as you well know, we must not complain. No, of course not, my lord, and I'm keeping my ears open. I thought you would, the Marquis said. Simona heard Dawkins walk into the passage. Good night, my lord, he called as he opened the door. Good night, Dawkins. She heard the door close and realized that the Marquis was now alone. She thought perhaps he was only waiting until Dawkins was out of sight. Then he could cross the passage to the Countess's room. Simona was desperately afraid of losing him, so she placed the lamp onto a table and tapped gently on the door. She had no idea that the Marquis stiffened on hearing her knock. He was thinking, although it seemed incredible, that the Countess was breaking all the unwritten rules of the etiquette of conducting a liaison. She had ventured to his room rather than wait for him, if indeed he intended to do so to visit her. The door opened slowly. He saw it was not the Countess who stood before him, but Simona. He stared at her in sheer astonishment. Her fair hair, long and curled at the ends, was falling over her shoulders, and she was looking enchanting. She was wearing an elegant dressing gown which matched the colour of her eyes and was trimmed with white lace. As he stared at her without speaking, she walked cautiously into his bedroom, shutting the communicating door behind her. The Marquis exclaimed, Miss Bell, what on earth are you doing here? Simona put her finger to her lips. He was wearing a long, dark robe which was frogged across the chest to give him a military appearance. Because her father wore a similar garment, Simona knew it was his dressing gown. Once again it flashed through her mind that he was just about to cross the passage to the Countess. She walked quickly until she reached him. Taking her finger from her lips, she whispered, I have to tell you something of great importance. which is why I am here." "As you should not be," the Marquis responded almost sharply. At the same time, because she had whispered, he spoke in a low voice. "I have something to tell you," Simona repeated, "but I could not approach you this evening. I had to come to you before it was too late." As she spoke the last words, she looked over her shoulder towards the door. The Marquis indicated that he understood what she was trying to tell him. Without replying, he crossed the room and turned the key in the lock of the door that led into the corridor. Simona did not move. When he returned to her, the Marquis took her by the arm and led her to the far end of the room by a large window, where the curtains had been drawn back and she could see the moon and stars filling the sky. "Now," he said in an almost normal voice, "we can talk without being heard or interrupted." He could tell by the expression on Simona's face that she was frightened. "Now, what is it that you want to tell me?" the Marquis asked gently. "I am afraid," Simona began, not looking straight at him, "that you will be shocked when I tell you. I was eavesdropping in a place where I should not have been. At the same time, because I feel it is important to England, and perhaps, although I may be wrong, this is the reason why you are here in Berlin, that I must tell you what I have overheard." The Marquis was instantly alert. He could not believe it possible that anything this beautiful young lady could tell him would be of any help in his quest to find Watson. There was just a chance, he supposed, that she had overheard something which could be of use, yet he could not help thinking it was extremely unlikely. There was only one chair beneath the window, so he fetched another one from beside the bed. Simona had sat down on the chair he indicated, and when he joined her, the Marquis said, "I think it is very kind and very brave of you to come to me, but you must not stay long. So, tell me quickly, why you think what you overheard could be so important." Simona drew in her breath. "I must tell you first," she began, "that a few days ago, when everyone was out, I entered the Baron's sanctuary, as it is called, because Karoline had not already showed this room to me." She looked at the Marquis as if she was hoping he understood her before continuing. "I noticed in this room the most fascinating red lacquered sedan chair, which was quite different from anything I have ever seen." "I have seen it," the Marquis said. "Then you realize why I found it so interesting," Simona said. "As I was admiring it, I heard voices coming down the corridor." She paused, and the Marquis noticed the colour flood into her cheeks as she said, Because I did not want them to find me, I slipped into this sedan chair and shut the door." "I can understand you doing that," the Marquis said reassuringly. He knew as he spoke that it was what she wanted him to say. "It was then that the Baron began to talk to a man he called Karl." "Did you say Karl?" the Marquis asked in rather a strange tone. "Yes," Simona replied, "but I did not hear his other name." "I know who he is," the Marquis replied. "I thought from what he said," Simona murmured, "that perhaps he was from the German embassy in London." "He is," the Marquis answered, "and his full name is Count Karl Woldensee." "Tell me what he said." Simona closed her eyes for a moment. She had recalled the conversation so often in her mind, knowing that she must repeat it to the Marquis. Now she wanted to remember every word as clearly as possible. "The Baron started," she began, "by saying, 'I am anxious to know how things are going.' Then Karl replied, 'Not very well, I'm afraid. As you know, our Emperor is impatient and does not like to be kept waiting.'" She opened her eyes for a moment and glanced at the Marquis to see that he was listening intently. "Next, the Baron said," she continued, "'You mean you have no further information about the gun?' The Marquis was stunned. "Did he say, 'about the gun'?" "Yes, that is what he said," Simona confirmed. "And Karl answered, 'Alas, no. How are you faring with that man, Watson?'" Again she glanced at the Marquis, who was looking at her as if he could not believe what he was hearing. "I felt sure that the Baron shook his head," Simona informed him, "although I could not see him. Then he said he is extremely obstinate. Of course we keep him well guarded in the Panzer house, in case anyone should try to take him away from us, but so far it appears no one is particularly interested." "And how," the Marquis demanded, "did Karl respond to that statement?" "He said," Simona replied, "I am sure, nevertheless, they must be. After all, I understand he was one of the main designers of the gun." Then the Baron added, "We have tried in every way possible to persuade him to give us a drawing of his work, or even an explanation of how it will perform when it is fired." "And what did Karl say to that?" the Marquis inquired. "Karl said he will not oblige. He pleads ignorance." The Baron then answered, "And that, as you well know, makes it very difficult for us to pin down or translate into anything that is of the slightest use." Simona paused again, and when the Marquis did not speak, she carried on. Karl laughed and said, "You are right there, and I am finding it very difficult indeed in England to get anyone to talk." She looked at the Marquis uncertainly. He realized that she was perturbed, and he could hardly believe what he was hearing was the truth. How was it possible, after all his anxiety, that this young girl could tell him all he wanted to know? As if she felt it embarrassing, Simona looked away from him and she said, "The Baron next asked Karl, 'Have you managed to meet the Marquis of Midhurst?'" "And what did Karl say to that question?" the Marquis inquired. "He said, 'I have only been introduced to him at a party, and I cannot say I have got very far in that direction.'" Simona stammered over the words. She had left out what Karl had said about the Marquis preferring the opposite sex, which she thought sounded too intimate. Almost as if he had recognized what had been said about him, the Marquis asked her, "And what did the Baron say to that?" "He said that you were the key to the whole enterprise, and he had been told on good authority that the gun was your own conception, and that you had persuaded the Prince of Wales to take a personal interest in its development." The Marquis raised his hand to his forehead. "I can hardly believe that you are clever enough," he said, "to tell me everything I have wanted to know. As you have guessed, this is the reason I have come to Berlin." "What else did they say?" "The Baron told Karl that he must get to know you and pretend that he was greatly interested in the development of guns. Then he told the Baron that he had been reliably informed that you were coming on a visit to Berlin." "How could he have known that?" the Marquis murmured to himself. "The Baron said he did not believe it," Simona continued, "but Karl persuaded him to write you a letter inviting you to stay here as his guest." "So that accounts for it," the Marquis said, as if he was speaking to himself. "Was anything else discussed?" "The Baron said that they must learn more about your gun so that they, the Germans, could produce one which was more powerful and effective than anything used by the British." Simona hesitated for a moment. "He then suggested," and her voice trembled, "that the Baron should torture Mr. Watson in order to force the plans from him. But the Baron would not commit himself." "That is certainly one point in his favour," the Marquis said. "What happened next?" Now the colour was again pouring into Simona's cheeks, making her look even more beautiful. "You understand," the Marquis assured her gently, "that everything you have told me is of the utmost importance, and I cannot tell you how grateful I am. But I must know every word that was said, no matter how embarrassing you find it." Simona turned her head away and said in a very small voice, "The Baron said, 'You were notable as a ladies' man, and were determined not to get married. Therefore, to make your visit here really enjoyable, he intended to invite Zivana as a fellow guest.'" There was silence. The Marquis thought he had been correct in suspecting that was why the Countess had been invited, and now he inquired, "And what did Karl say to that?" "He told the Baron he was a genius, and that Zivana was famous, and could extract a secret, however well hidden, from the Sphinx itself." There was further silence until the Marquis asked, "Is that all?" "The Baron wrote a letter for Karl to take to you before he left to catch his train. As soon as they had left, I crept out of the Sedan Chair and ran into another room." The Marquis put out his hand and laid it over hers. "I can only thank you," he said, "as one day the Prince of Wales will thank you, for being so intrepid and brave enough to tell me everything you had overheard. "I felt I had to tell you," Simona murmured, "because the Countess is so beautiful, and I thought you might somehow allow her to trick you behind your back." "I had no idea," the Marquis said quietly. "That was why she had been invited. But what you have done, Simona, is to tell me not only that Watson is alive, but where he is." "So you can rescue him?" Simona inquired. "I will try, of course," the Marquis replied, "but I may need your help. I do not want you to be involved further in this adventure, because it is definitely dangerous. At the same time, quite frankly, you are the only person in Berlin, apart from my valet, whom I can trust." Simona's eyes opened very wide. "Is that the truth?" she asked. "I swear to you it is the truth," the Marquis replied. "I can only say thank you, and thank you again from the bottom of my heart, for having made matters much easier for me than they had been until now." He smiled before he added, "I felt I was looking for a needle in a haystack, but now, unexpectedly, when I thought you were just a pretty debutante, you have given me information which no one else in the whole of Berlin could tell me." "I am glad, so very, very glad," Simona sighed. "Now you will be able to rescue Mr. Watson, and I am sure you will be able to think of some brilliant plan." "It is something I must do," the Marquis said, "and if I need your help, I will not hesitate to ask you." His fingers tightened over her hand as he said, "But you do understand we are both playing a very dangerous game. If for one moment the Baron or anyone else knew you were involved, you might disappear like Watson, or I might have what would be called an unfortunate accident." Simona cried in horror. "That must not happen." No, of course not. I swear to you that I will protect you in every way I can, but neither of us can trust anyone else but each other." "I understand," Simona nodded. "Now, you must go back the way you came," the Marquis urged. "I suppose no one knows that you have come here to me?" No, of course not. Everyone expects me to be asleep, and I was fortunate enough to remember all these bedrooms between my rooms and yours have communicating sitting rooms between them." "That is certainly very useful," the Marquis agreed. As he spoke, he was thanking heaven that the Countess had been placed on the other side of the corridor. If she was waiting for him, which he hoped she would not, she would wait in vain. At the same time, it would be disastrous if she found out that Simona had been able to find him through a series of communicating doors. Simona rose to her feet. "I am so glad," she said, "that I have been able to help you, and that you are not shocked at my eavesdropping." She stammered over the words and blushed again as she did so. "I think," the Marquis said quietly, "you were directed into doing what you have just achieved by a power greater than both of us, and which we call on for help when we are completely helpless." Simona looked at him wide-eyed. "That is what I have always believed," she answered, "and why I prayed that I might be able to help you." "Then your prayers have been heard," the Marquis assured her. "What you must do, Simona, and this is essential, is go on praying that we shall both be successful in serving the country we love." Yes, of course," she agreed. She walked towards the communicating door, and the Marquis opened it for her and saw her lamp. He placed it into her hand, saying, "Go back slowly and quietly, and I will stay here until I am certain that you are in your own room. If you call out and need me, I will come to you at once." "Thank you. You are very kind." "And you are the bravest young lady I have ever met." She smiled at him shyly and closed the communicating door behind her, because it had been shut when she had arrived, and she knew that everything must be left exactly as it had been. When she reached her own room, she looked back thinking that somehow the Marquis would know instinctively that she was safe and had not encountered any difficulty. "He was very kind," she told herself, "and I am so glad I have been able to help him." She took off her dressing gown and, blowing out the lamp, slipped into bed. She wondered if the Marquis was doing the same. Surely now, after all she had said to him, he would not go to the Countess's room. At the same time, it was absolutely essential for neither the Countess nor the Baron to gain the slightest idea that the Marquis had discovered their plot. She could hear Maria claiming that the Countess was a bad woman. Even though it might be essential for the Marquis to be pleasant to her, she thought in some way it would be humiliating for him. "Please, God, protect him," she prayed. "Please do not permit her to harm him in any way, and thank you for allowing me to learn the truth so that I could warn him." Her prayer was sincere and from the depths of her heart. As she closed her eyes, she was sure she would have been heard in heaven. "Take care of him, God," she prayed again fervently, before falling asleep. Chapter 5. After Simona had left him, the Marquis locked the communicating door into the sitting room and again checked the door into the corridor to make certain it was secure. Then he climbed into bed, knowing he would not be interrupted until the morning. All the time, everything that Simona had told him was swimming through his mind. He thought how fortunate he was that she had been clever enough to find out exactly what he wanted. He slept fitfully for a while, before waking early to lie planning what he would do now. Finally, he decided he would need to take Dawkins into his confidence, as he had no idea where to find the Panzer house, and he could hardly go round looking for it, nor was it possible for him to ask the Baron or any of his staff for directions. He unlocked the door and waited for Dawkins to come in and call him. When his valet finally arrived, the Marquis said, "I have heard some good news, Dawkins, and it is most important for you to listen carefully to what I am about to say." "I always does that, my lord." The Marquis explained that he had discovered where Watson was being held, and that he was locked up in the Panzer house. "You're sure that's where he be, my lord?" Dawkins inquired. "Quite sure," the Marquis answered. "Panzer means armour, so I imagine that because the Germans love museums, it is where there will be a collection of ancient armour, or which I expect they have a considerable amount." Dawkins stared at him before saying, "That be true, my lord, and I knows how I can help." The Marquis looked surprised. "How?" he asked briefly. "When we was at Cowes," Dawkins said, "I became friendly with the Kaiser's valet, quite a nice chap he be, and we had a drink together several times ashore." "The Kaiser's valet?" the Marquis murmured beneath his breath. "One day when we was talking," Dawkins continued, "although I don't think he really knows much, he was saying things about the machinery aboard the yacht, and the interest His Majesty was taking in the guns on our battleships." The Marquis pressed his lips together. He could not believe that the Kaiser was employing his valet, as well as so many others, to spy on the Royal Navy. "So I finds out," Dawkins resumed, "that Franz, for that's his name, be very keen on old armour. Your lordship knows the sort you have at your castle, which your ancestors, one of them I know, wore at the Battle of Agincourt, or was it some other battle? I know the armour you mean. I promised to Franz that if he comes to London, then I'd show him some of the armour we have, and he says he'd do the same if I comes to Berlin." The Marquis exclaimed, "That means you will be able to find out where the Panzer house is, and also, if we are lucky, get us inside." "I expects I can fix it, my lord," Dawkins replied confidently. "Franz be a simple sort of man, and I thinks he will keep his word." "Well, for heaven's sake, be very careful what you say to him," the Marquis ordered. "If they obtain any indication that we know where Watson is, they will move him immediately, and we may never find out where they have taken him." "I knows that, and your lordship can trust me. The difficulty will be how I meet Franz." The Marquis was silent for a moment before responding. "I have been thinking how I can integrate myself with the Kaiser. I learned something last night which made me think of a way which would be entirely different from anything I could have ever imagined." He was thinking as he spoke of the strange story he had been told of the Emperor's obsession for women's hands, and while he had been reflecting on his strategy in the night, he realized that Simona had slender and very long-fingered hands. They were just one aspect of her outstanding physical beauty. He was also mindful that the Countess's hands, while quite elegant, were not in any way distinctive. These thoughts passed through his mind almost as if a plan was being unfolded in front of his eyes. When he walked downstairs to breakfast, it was a relief to find that the only person present was the Baron. "Good morning, Marquis," he said. "I see you are up early, while the fairer sex are all fast asleep." "I expect they are tired after last night's extravaganza," the Marquis replied, smiling. The Baron began a long rigmarole that the young people of today did not have the stamina of their predecessors. The Marquis was not listening, as he was planning in his mind what he would say when the Baron gave him a chance to speak. The opportunity came when the Baron finished his breakfast. He rang the bell for some fruit which was not on the table. "I was just thinking," the Marquis began, "that it would be polite for me to pay my respects to His Majesty today. Seeing how particular he is about his protocol, he might think it rude if I wait until tomorrow or the day after." Of course, the Baron agreed, "and I will order a carriage to take you to the palace as early as you wish. The Emperor is usually available in the morning, while he may have 100 things to occupy him this afternoon." "That is very kind of you, and as I have a special message from His Majesty from Lord Belgrave, I think that I should take Simona with me." He guessed that the Baron was curious to know what message Lord Belgrave could have sent to the All-Highest, but was, however, too polite to ask questions. The two men were just finishing their breakfast when Simona and Karoline entered the dining room. "I thought you were both having breakfast in bed," the Baron exclaimed as they appeared. "Of course not, Papa," Karoline riposted, kissing him. "Simona and I do not want to waste our time in bed when there are so many exciting things to do and see." "Well, I have just arranged with our friend the Marquis," the Baron announced, "that Simona should accompany him to the new palace this morning." Karoline looked surprised. "Why should she do that?" she inquired. The Baron looked at the Marquis, who said, "It is something we must do sooner or later, and as the Emperor is a stickler for protocol, it would be better for us to go this morning." "Then of course we must go," Simona agreed. "Do you mean we should leave immediately after breakfast?" "As soon as you have finished," the Marquis smiled at her. He felt that Simona was very self-controlled not to ask innumerable questions, as any other woman might have done, instead of which she concentrated on finishing her breakfast. Karoline was begging the Marquis not to stay longer than was necessary at the palace. "There are so many really fascinating sights in Berlin that I want to show Simona," she said, "and she will find all the bowing and scraping, or rather curtsying, where she is concerned, a terrible bore." "I agree with you," the Marquis replied, "but I am afraid it all has to be gone through." Simona drank her coffee and rose to her feet. "I will go and put on my hat, and then I'll be ready as soon as you are." "I will summon the carriage at once," the Baron said, ringing the bell. Alone in her bedroom, Simona wondered exactly what was happening and why the Marquis wished to see the Kaiser and take her with him. She had been under the impression that his visit to Berlin was, at least ostensibly, a private one. In which case, there would be no reason for him to call officially at the palace. "But he is also taking me," she thought to herself, "and he must have some special reason to include me." She thought, however, she would receive an answer to all her queries when she was alone with the Marquis in the carriage. Anyway, it would be delightful to be in his company. She was wearing a very pretty summer gown, and the hat was trimmed with spring flowers. As she walked downstairs, the Marquis thought that no one could have looked lovelier, or for that matter, so young, unspoiled, and untouched. He did not know why that last word came into his mind, but it was obvious to him that she was the exact opposite in every way to the Countess. The carriage the Baron had provided for them was closed and drawn by two well-bred horses. As Simona came out of the house, she was greeted by two servants in smart uniform on the box. Just before they moved off, she noticed to her surprise another man, not in uniform, spring up and sit beside the footman. She thought perhaps he was a guide. Then she realized that, of course, the Baron's coachman would know the way to the new palace. As the carriage drove off, the Marquis informed her. "That is my valet who is sitting in front. Apparently he made friends with the Kaiser's valet when they were at Cowes, and he wishes to meet him again." Simona looked at him wide-eyed. There was a faint smile on the Marquis's lips as he added, "I know what you are thinking, but it would be a mistake to put it into words." "Yes, of course," Simona agreed quickly. As they drove on in silence, there were 100 questions she wanted to ask him. She thought, however, it would be a mistake to do so unless he offered an explanation first. They were nearing the royal highway when the Marquis said, "I told the Baron that I wanted to take you with me because your father had given me a message for the Kaiser. The real reason was that I wanted him to see your hands." Simona looked at him in sheer astonishment. "My hands?" I have been told that the Emperor admires women only for their hands. It does not matter how unattractive they are in other respects, as long as their hands are beautiful. He is instantly attracted to them, and is unusually polite and attentive." "How extraordinary!" Simona cried. "Why should he feel like that?" "I have no idea," the Marquis replied. "But an emperor, if no one else, can have very peculiar ideas, and people of course pander to them." He thought for a moment before adding, "Of course you are correct in wearing gloves, but if you can find some excuse for removing them and revealing your very beautiful hands, I am sure we will find the Kaiser is more pleasant to us than he might be otherwise." Simona raised her head and laughed. It was a very pretty laugh, and very different from the affected sounds made by the beauties in London. "I do not believe it," Simona said. "The whole idea is just too fantastic." "It would even be enjoyable if it were not so serious. And do you realize how serious the situation has become?" "Of course I do, and you know I will help you in every possible way that I can." "I know," the Marquis replied, smiling at her, "and I am very grateful." By the time the carriage was approaching the palace, and as they reached one of the outer gates, the sentry recognized the coachman's livery and saluted. They passed through and drew up outside the enormous front door. Once again, Simona found it difficult to believe it was all real and not a dream. The Marquis explained who he was, and after a short wait, an equerry appeared to proclaim that the Emperor would grant them an audience. They walked up what seemed a mountain of stairs until they were ushered into an upstairs study. It was a large and lofty room, and the walls were hung with a light green damask that was faded in many places. Simona noticed that the furniture was upholstered in the same material. Next to one of the doors, there was an immense black marble mantelpiece. Nearby was a walnut writing table, a big, rather clumsy piece of furniture with machine-turned feet. It looked out of place between two immense buhl chests of drawers with grey marble tops. At a glance, Simona recognized that they were outstanding and would have impressed her father. On all the fine furniture, as well as on the desk, there was an enormous collection of charcoal sketches and photographs of beautiful women, some framed and some unframed. She only had a chance for a quick look. As they moved across the room, she realized that the Kaiser was standing at the far end of the room, waiting for them to reach him. Having never seen Kaiser Wilhelm II, Simona had expected him to be taller. He also seemed very young when she compared him with the Prince of Wales. There was, she thought, a somewhat aggressive expression on his face as the Marquis bowed before them. Almost as if the Kaiser was forcing himself to be pleasant, he held out his hand, saying, "I was not expecting, Marquis, to see you in Berlin." The Marquis had been warned previously of the Kaiser's pride in his own personal strength, and how he liked to demonstrate it by the way he shook hands. His right hand was massive and ugly in appearance, and any man who shook it found himself gripped in an almost agonizing vice. In fact, as one of the Marquis's friends had told him, "I endured the ordeal with my teeth clenched. Even so, I could hardly suppress a groan." The Marquis, however, managed to shake the Kaiser's hand without too much pain. But he noticed that the Kaiser was wearing more rings than usual. These, he knew, were the means by which His Majesty was trying to hide a number of conspicuous moles which disfigured his hand. Having shaken hands with the Marquis, the Kaiser turned his attention to Simona. "May I present to your Majesty," the Marquis announced, "the Honourable Simona Bell. Her father is Lord Belgrave, who wishes to be remembered most respectfully to your Majesty." "Of course I remember Lord Belgrave," the Kaiser exclaimed. He was looking at Simona as he spoke. She felt as if he was appraising her in a way that was almost offensive. She had curtsied to the ground as the Marquis presented her, and now as she rose, she said, "It is a great honour, your Majesty, for me to be here and to meet you, as you have always been one of my heroes ever since I was a child." The Kaiser looked surprised, while the Marquis frowned as if she was saying too much. Simona looked up at him in an almost childlike manner, saying, "Was it wrong for me to say that?" "No, of course not," the Kaiser said before the Marquis could speak. "And I am thinking that perhaps you would wish to join the portraits of all the beautiful women you see around you." "I would never aspire to that honour, your Majesty," Simona replied. "But perhaps you will be kind enough to allow me to look at them?" Of course, the Kaiser agreed. Look where you like, while I speak to the Marquis. I have some questions to ask him, which I hope he will give me an answer. He spoke almost aggressively, as if he thought the Marquis might try to evade him. Simona moved towards the huge writing desk. As she did so, she took off her gloves, as if the Kaiser had given her his permission. The Emperor walked towards the fireplace, before suddenly asking the Marquis, in a very low, conspiratorial voice, "What is all this I hear about a special gun being produced for my uncle, the Prince of Wales?" "A special gun?" the Marquis exclaimed. "No one has told me anything about it." "Are you quite sure of that?" the Emperor inquired. The Marquis had thought it odd when they entered the room that there was no aide-de-camp in attendance. He now realized that the Kaiser was cleverer than those who spied for him, as he was obviously hoping that he could acquire for himself the knowledge he needed, so as to score over those who had failed to do so. The Marquis raised his hand to his forehead. "Let me think, Your Majesty," he said. "There was some talk about a gun at Cowes, which I perceived that the concept was a German invention." No, the Kaiser asserted. "It was an English gun that I heard about. In fact, I was led to believe it was something that you yourself had invented." The Marquis laughed. "I wish I could claim that was true. It is very difficult to invent anything new these days, although I possess some new gadgets on my yacht which have not yet been put into operation. I am, as Your Majesty well knows, not concerned with anything more lethal on the seahorse than a fishing rod." The Kaiser laughed as the Marquis had intended, but as he realized that he had learnt nothing from the conversation, there was a frown between his eyes and a tightening of his lips. This was always a warning to those who served him. As if she had sensed the atmosphere had changed, Simona joined them with a framed photograph in her ungloved hands. "Do tell me, Your Majesties," she inquired sweetly, "who is this very beautiful lady? She is more exquisite than anyone I have ever seen before." She held up the photograph as she spoke. It would have been impossible for the Kaiser not to see the delicate whiteness and perfect proportions of Simona's hands. He stared at them before he replied to her question. "That is someone called Madame Herbert, and you are quite right. She is an exceptionally beautiful woman." Simona was not to know that the Kaiser's admiration for Madame Herbert was said at court to have begun and ended with her slender fingers, and it was the violent jealousy of the Empress which had brought the infatuation to an end. There had, however, been so much fuss about the affair that the Kaiser had affected a disregard for all women, except that now he noticed their hands. It was exceedingly intelligent, the Marquis thought, of Simona to have used exactly the right words, and, perhaps intuitively, to have chosen out of a large number the portrait of someone the Kaiser had really admired. As he took the photograph from Simona, he was looking at her hands. "I am sure," he offered, "she would both like a cup of coffee, or perhaps a glass of wine before you leave the palace." "That is exceedingly kind of Your Majesty," the Marquis said, "but we do not wish to impose upon your time. Moreover, we should return to the Baron, who is waiting to take us on a sightseeing tour." "What do you want to see?" the Kaiser asked, almost truculently. "That is more interesting than my palace." Simona gave a little cry. "I would love to see it," she said. "I have heard of all the beautiful art Your Majesty has collected, and I think it is so brilliant of you." "Then allow me to show you some of the treasures in this room," the Kaiser suggested. He took her to one of the wall cabinets and opened it, to show her a remarkable collection of jewelled ornaments. There was such a large number that she could not inspect them all, but she found them fascinating. The Marquis noticed that while she was holding a goblet ornamented with rubies, the Kaiser was again concentrating on her hands. Finally, an aide-de-camp entered to inform His Majesty that a deputation was waiting for an audience in the throne room. It was almost with reluctance that the Kaiser said goodbye. As Simona curtsied, he took her hand in his, and to her surprise, raised it to his lips and kissed it. "We must meet again," he said, "before you leave Berlin." He repeated what he had said to the Marquis before he left the room. An equerry escorted them down the long stairs to the hall. Their carriage was ordered so that they could step into it outside the great doorway. Only as they drove off did the Marquis give a sigh of relief and say, You were superb, and so quick-witted with the Kaiser. I expected him to be far more difficult, and certainly be disagreeable, as he always is about the Prince of Wales. I was frightened of doing anything wrong, Simona said. Why did he ask you about the gun? Because he wants to learn all about it before anybody else does. And do you think he was convinced when you said you knew nothing about the gun? Simona asked. No, of course not, the Marquis answered. The Germans are absolutely certain it is something I do know all about. The Kaiser will never be content until the gun is in his possession. Simona gave a small cry. That is frightening. Perhaps it is dangerous for you to be in Berlin, and that you should return to London at once. They would never dare kidnap me, the Marquis said. In the same way as they have kidnapped Watson. They will not get rid of me until they have acquired the secret which they are sure I hold. It is dangerous, very dangerous, Simona exclaimed. You are walking on a tightrope. The Marquis smiled. Then you must make certain that I do not fall off of it. What can I do? Simona asked again, spreading out her hands. You have been very successful so far, the Marquis reassured her, and more successful than I have been. All I can beg of you is to continue to support me. You know I will, Simona breathed. The Marquis was longing to know if Dawkins had made any contact with the Kaiser's valet, and he hoped to be able to have a word with him as soon as they had returned to the Baron's house. But the Countess was waiting for him. She was dressed flamboyantly and still looking very alluring. You are returned, she cried, throwing up her hands. I was wondering what had become of you, and was half afraid the Emperor would insist on keeping you at the palace. His Majesty was very gracious, the Marquis replied. But while we were offered something to drink, we were not invited to luncheon. All that matters, the Countess sighed seductively, is that you are back. She placed her hand on the Marquis's arm as she spoke. He thought it was not nearly as attractive as Simona's, and certainly would not have pleased the Kaiser. I am glad your visit to the palace was a success, the Baron was saying. And now, as luncheon is served, let us go to the dining room. They were joined by the Baroness and Karoline, who wanted to hear everything that had been said, and exactly what Simona had thought of the palace. It is too big and overcrowded, Simona explained, with so much beautiful art and furniture that the Kaiser has no chance of exhibiting anything to its best effect. That is very true, the Baron agreed. But I do hope you did not say so to the Emperor. He cannot bear criticism of any sort. The Marquis laughed. Of course not. In fact, His Majesty much admired Simona's hands. Naturally he did, the Baron exclaimed. I should have told you that His Majesty's idea of beauty is now entirely confined to a woman's hands. She may have the nose of a Kalmuk, be chicken-breasted or hunchbacked, but if she has beautiful hands, he will draw her into conversation, compliment her, and, on retiring, kiss her hand. The Baroness added, Only once, if exposed to the gaze of scrutinizing eyes, but half a dozen times and more, when unobserved. The Marquis laughed, but he soon realized that sitting beside him, the Countess was furious. She was looking at Simona in what he felt was a hostile manner. Quite suddenly he was afraid, not for himself, but for the lovely girl who had helped him more than he could express in words. Unexpectedly, it struck him that Simona might be in danger, not from the Kaiser and his agents, who were holding Watson, but from another woman, the Countess, and it would be his fault. The sooner we leave Germany, the better, he told himself. Immediately after luncheon, he ran up to his bedroom to change out of his formal clothes and to be able to talk to Dawkins. As his valet closed the door after he had entered his bedroom, the Marquis looked inquiringly at him, and Dawkins said, Good news, my lord. He spoke in a low voice, and the Marquis immediately took him to the window, as he had done with Simona the night before. Keeping his voice very low, the Marquis asked, Did you make any contact with the Kaiser's valet? I saw friends, my lord, Dawkins replied, and he was delighted to see me, and he's meeting me early this afternoon. The Marquis sighed with relief. This is very well done, Dawkins. He's coming here, Dawkins continued, and I thinks, my lord, I should be wise to take him first to a pub, if there be such a thing in this town. You can take him for a drink at any beer-house, the Marquis said, but choose where you will not be recognized, and remember you might be followed. "I thinks of that, my lord, but so far no one seems to pay much attention to me. Well, thank goodness for that, but I expect even though we do not realise it, we are under observation. I'm just hoping, my lord, that Franz will keep his word and shows me the armour we talked about at Cowes. If you can see the outside of the building, and exactly where it is, that will be a big help," the Marquis said. "At the moment, I have no plan as to how I can rescue Watson, but we have been very lucky in learning where he is being held, which is at least an enormous saving of time and anxiety." "I agrees with you, my lord," Dawkins answered, "and if it's possible, I'll get inside that there Panzer house and somehow find out exactly where he's kept." "Be very careful," the Marquis cautioned. "They are on the alert. The Kaiser himself asked me point blank if I had heard about the gun." "And what did your lordship say to him?" "Naturally," the Marquis responded. "I told him that I did not know anything about the gun, but he did not believe me." Dawkins sighed. "They knows too much already," he said. "That is the trouble. Our means to find out who's talked in the first place." The Marquis shrugged his shoulders. "It might be anyone. I have always believed I could trust my own people, but they might have been overheard when talking, and might quite unintentionally have revealed to a stranger that they were designing a new gun." He thought as he spoke that there were 1,000 ways in which the information could have been leaked, the unfortunate fact being it was now known to the Kaiser. The Marquis finished changing his clothes and said, "Do what you can, Dawkins, and of course do not spare any expense in entertaining your friend Franz. I don't expect, my lord, he has ever tasted anything much better than beer, and he's told me how the servants at the palace are treated." The Marquis had learned from a number of sources that the servants who were employed daily at the new palace were obliged to bring in their own food. Although they worked long hours, and some of them came from a distance, there were no meals provided for them and no comfort of any sort. In fact, a statesman who had stayed at the new palace had told him a horrifying story. He had seen 40 hungry women and girls, some old and some very young, hanging about the back stairs of what the Kaiser boasted as being the most magnificent royal court of Europe. "I found it difficult to believe what I was seeing," he had said scornfully. "Most of them were munching black bread scantily spread with lard, while from tin cans they drank a cold chicory concoction, which was masquerading under the name of coffee." "I cannot believe it," the Marquis had replied. "Surely the Kaiser cannot be so mean." "He most certainly is," his informant answered. "And my wife said that the women were wearing washed-out calico dresses and small shawls in the winter, which barely covered their heads and breasts." Again the Marquis had questioned if this was true. "The imperial royal employees," the statesman continued, "the porters and chauffeurs, were all in uniforms decorated with gold and silver. The difference lies in that they are engaged by the year, while the women are employed by the month, and only engaged while the court is in session at the new palace. I am only surprised that this story is not publicised in the press," the Marquis remarked. "There has been quite a lot of talk about it," he was told, "but the allowances for the royal board are cut so fine as to be only enough for their Majesty's entourage and their guests." He laughed as he added, "I am told that when the Kaiser invites extra guests at the last moment, the courses are hurried through because there is a shortage of rations. Frequently, some of the visitors are not served as if by accident." Remembering the grandeur when they entered the palace today, the Marquis found it difficult to believe that there was such cheese-paring behind the Kaiser's doors. Yet he had been told about this situation not once, but several times, of course by those who disliked the Kaiser and his behaviour towards the Prince of Wales. It seemed extraordinary that the Kaiser should allow women who were actually employed by the court to suffer hunger on back staircases where the cold wind whistled. The Marquis felt the scenario was part of the enigma of the Kaiser, who might eventually be a danger to the world, where at present England reigned supreme. Equally, the Marquis knew it would be a mistake to underestimate his power or his ambition for supremacy, and that he was engaged in what was for the moment a secret war. Without really meaning to, he had involved that lovely young girl, Simona, in his plans, and he was taking her into a precarious situation in which, if he suffered, so would she. And it was too late to withdraw her from the plot. "I must protect her," the Marquis told himself. "I must keep her away from anything that might hurt her physically or mentally." At the same time as he walked downstairs, knowing that the Countess was waiting for him, he was apprehensive. Chapter 6. When luncheon was over, which, as usual in Berlin, was early, the Baron looked inquiringly at the Marquis. "What are you planning to do this afternoon?" "I need to drop in for a moment at the British Embassy," the Marquis answered, "since otherwise I shall be in trouble with the ambassador. But afterwards, I thought that Simona would like to show me some of the special sights of Berlin." As he spoke, he saw an eager look come into the Countess's eyes. She leaned across the table to place her hand on his. "There is nothing I should enjoy more," she breathed. "Aunt, I have some very remarkable surprises to show you." She spoke in such a seductive manner, making her meaning obvious, the Marquis thought, to everyone listening. "I will order a carriage for you," the Baron offered. "And I hope that both of you will enjoy your sightseeing tour." "It is what I have been looking forward to," the Marquis said, smiling at Simona as he spoke. After they left the dining room, Simona could not help feeling depressed. Surely, she thought, the Marquis understood that the Countess was dangerous, yet he was deliberately going sightseeing with her. He was also speaking at her in a deep voice that seemed to complement her seductive tone. She tried to tell herself the Marquis was not her responsibility, but at the same time, she was desperately afraid for him. It was impossible for one man alone to better the Kaiser and all those who served him. How, too, could he resist the wiles of a woman who had cajoled secrets from so many other men? Karoline was, of course, completely ignorant of the intrigues swirling around her. "What shall we do this afternoon, Simona?" she asked. "I do not feel particularly energetic after going to the palace this morning," Simona replied. "Then I know what we will do," Karoline ventured. "There are some very interesting books I can show you, which I believe are the kind you will enjoy, and we can sit in the garden in the shade." Simona agreed to this suggestion, and they walked into the garden where there were several comfortable chairs, arranged under the trees. However, Simona found it difficult to concentrate on the books that Karoline produced, even though they were indeed the sort which had interested her enormously when they were at school in Florence. The two girls talked about the future now that they had completed their education. "I intend to get married as quickly as possible," Karoline asserted. "It is a great mistake to be what you English call an old maid in Germany." "You are not likely to be that," Simona smiled, "but surely you will fall in love first." "Papa always says that love comes after marriage, and he is very keen for me to marry someone as important as he. He is already approaching some of his friends who have sons of the right age." Simona thought that nothing could be more frightening than an arranged marriage. She did not say so to Karoline, but what she wanted for herself was to fall in love. It must be with someone who loved her for herself, no matter who her parents might be, and however unimpressive her antecedents. She thought the gentleman should be tall, strong, protective, and of course intelligent. "That is why I enjoy being with the Marquis," she told herself. "He is so astute, and everything he says seems to be so interesting, quite apart from the situation he finds himself in now." However, she decided that she must be sensible if she was so foolish as to fall in love with the Marquis, knowing that he had no intention of marrying. He would only break her heart. "When I return to England," she thought, "I am sure that I shall meet some charming and delightful gentleman when Mamma takes me to London for the season." Then some tiresome part of her brain told her what she did not want to hear. None of them would be as handsome as the Marquis, as clever as the Marquis, or as interesting as the Marquis. She felt that she wanted to scream and run away from him at the very thought of him. Nevertheless, she knew, if she was to be truthful, that she was watching the time until he returned from his expedition from the Countess. They did not come back until long after tea was over. In fact, it was nearly time to dress for dinner. When they entered the drawing-room, Simona could not help but notice that the Countess was looking very pleased with herself. She was also behaving even more intimately with the Marquis than earlier. They started to tell the Baroness what they had seen and how interesting it had all been. As they did so, the Countess was continually touching the Marquis with her hands. She was looking into his eyes in a manner which Simona thought was excessively vulgar. Yet the Marquis seemed to be encouraging her, and she could not understand him. When she and Karoline walked upstairs to dress for dinner, she felt that there was a stone in her breast. She suddenly longed to go home and be with her mother and father. If the Marquis does not leave in a few days, she thought as she dressed, I will say that I have to return for a special engagement Mamma has arranged for me. I cannot stay here and watch him being captured and destroyed by that horrible woman. As there was no party that night, the Countess was able to flirt with the Marquis all through dinner, and she continued to do so when they moved into the drawing-room. Finally, Simona felt she could bear it no longer, and she was just about to say she was going to bed, when suddenly the Marquis began to sneeze. He sneezed, coughed and sneezed again, until there were tears in his eyes. He staggered to his feet and said, I do apologize, it's the hay fever. I often suffer from it, at this time of year. He spoke jerkily, sneezing between his words as he continued. I'll go to bed. What can we do for you? Can we send for a doctor? The Baron asked anxiously. My valet is used to, coping with this sort of attack. The Marquis gasped and sneezed again. I will be better in the morning, and in 24 hours it will be gone completely. I am very sorry, the Baroness sympathized. I do wish we could help you. You understand, I am better when I lie down, the Marquis wheezed as he staggered to the door. The Baron hurried after him to help him up the stairs. Simona noted the expression of disappointment and frustration on the Countess's face. She knew it was because she would certainly not see anything of the Marquis for the rest of the night. I wish I could do something for him, Simona said as she went upstairs with Karoline. It often happens to people this time of year, Karoline replied. When the trees are in blossom in the woods and the flowers in bloom, there is a great deal of pollen about. Well, we are going to bed early at any rate, Simona said, and perhaps, after being so late last night, it is a good thing. I am exhausted, Karoline sighed. Good night, Simona dear, and sleep well. The two girls walked to their own bedrooms. Simona undressed and climbed into bed, where she did not feel sleepy at all. She was worrying about the Marquis, hoping that he was not suffering too much. At least, she consoled herself, he would not have to endure the Countess putting her arms around his neck incessantly. She heard the Baron and Baroness come up to bed, and with them the Countess. They said good night to each other in the corridor, and Simona was sure that she heard the Countess's door closed. She wished she was brave enough to go to the Marquis's room and ask if she could help him in any way, but she knew that was something she must not do. If his valet were there, he would certainly be very shocked, and he might inform the other servants. I will just pray, she decided, that he will have recovered by the morning. Soon she fell asleep to dream that she and the Marquis were driving in a very fast carriage away from the new palace. They were going so fast that she felt there must be more than 2 horses pulling them. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder and a voice speaking in an urgent whisper. Wake up, Simona. She thought for a moment it was part of her dream. As she opened her eyes, she saw to her astonishment the Marquis's face looking at her, the light coming from a candle on the table by her bed. What is it? She asked. Are you ill? I need your help, and we will have to work very quickly, Simona, because we have a great deal to do. That is, if you will help me. Of course I will help you. Then listen to me, the Marquis urged. He moved a little closer to her before continuing. My valet, Dawkins, has found out we can release Watson from his prison, but we cannot be successful without your help. Simona's eyes widened. I will do anything you want me to do, she promised. That is what I hoped you would say, the Marquis responded. To assist me, you will have to put on this skin-tight rubber diving suit which I have brought with me. Simona looked at him in astonishment. And bring with you a dress and coat to wear on the train. The train? We are leaving Berlin as soon as we have freed Watson, so therefore I want you to pack everything you can into your cases, and Dawkins will carry them downstairs so that they can come with us. Is that a safe thing to do? Simona gasped. Everyone is asleep, and there is a carriage waiting for us on the other side of the garden. The Marquis stood up, and she saw that he was already dressed except for his coat. Be as quick as you can, he pleaded, and, as soon as you are dressed in the diving suit, open the communicating door. Dawkins will come and help you with your packing. Simona felt her head whirl. There were so many questions she wanted to ask, but she realized that the Marquis was in a hurry. He moved away from her bed, and almost before she realized what was happening, he disappeared through the communicating door into the sitting room. She jumped up, wondering for a moment whether she had imagined what he had told her. Then she saw a black rubber suit which would cover the body completely from feet to neck. She had seen photographs of men wearing similar suits for diving in the sea. The one the Marquis had brought her must have been for a boy. When she put it on, it was only a little too big. As she fastened it around her, she felt rather embarrassed. She ran to the wardrobe and took out her travelling coat. She pulled it on over her diving suit before opening the communicating door. Dawkins was waiting for her on the other side. "Are you ready, miss?" he whispered. "Show me which clothes you want me to take with you." Simona quickly picked out a dress and coat, which the Marquis said she would need to wear on the train. She carried them to a chair together with the hat that matched them. Dawkins was already taking her cases down from the cupboard, and with a speed that she thought any lady's maid would admire, he was taking her clothes out of the wardrobe. He packed them into 2 cases. He was so fast that by the time Simona had collected her handbag and the items she had placed on her dressing table, all her gowns were packed. Dawkins closed the 2 cases and locked them. "If you've left anything behind, miss," he said, "I expect they'll send it on to you. If not, the master will buy it for you. He can afford it." Simona smiled. She was, however, bewildered and somewhat frightened that everything was happening so quickly. As if he knew they were ready for him, the Marquis returned through the communicating door. He looked at Simona with her coat covering her diving suit and whispered, "You said you would help me, and now you will have to be very brave." As he spoke, Dawkins opened the door into the corridor very silently and peeped out. Then he picked up the cases and walked ahead. "Now, what you must do before we leave," the Marquis said, "is to write a letter to the Baron as quickly as you can and leave it on the writing table." "What shall I write to him?" "Tell the Baron that a special message has been given to Dawkins for me from the British Embassy to say that your father has been involved in an accident and therefore you need to return to England at once." He paused to see if Simona had understood before continuing. "Say that, rather than upset the household, I have offered to take you back to England in my yacht. Thank them for all their kindness, and say that you will let them know what has happened as soon as you have reached home." While he was speaking, Simona had seated herself at the writing desk and was beginning to write. When she had finished, she folded the letter and wrote the Baron's name on the envelope. The Marquis held out his hand. As his fingers closed over hers, she thought how strong and protective he was. Whatever he asked her to do, she must not be frightened. Like Dawkins, the Marquis peered round the door into the corridor, and after blowing out the candle, he and Simona left the room. They walked down a side staircase and found their way into the garden through a door that Dawkins had left open for them. Simona realised with a sense of relief that hers was the only bedroom which overlooked the garden, while the Baron and Baroness and the Countess's windows were on the front. Nevertheless, the Marquis led the way as much as possible in the shade of the trees. At the far end of the lawn, there was a gate which Simona had not seen before, and it was open. Once through the gate, they found themselves in a mews, and waiting for them was a closed carriage. The Marquis had not spoken since they had left Simona's bedroom. Dawkins opened the door of the carriage, although there were 2 men sitting on the box. As they climbed in, Simona saw her dress, coat and hat had been placed on the small seat opposite where she and the Marquis were to sit. There was another bundle, and she wondered vaguely what was in it. Dawkins shut the carriage door, climbed up onto the box, and the horses moved off. The Marquis did not relinquish Simona's hand, and she clung to him as she asked in a whisper, "Where are we going?" "To the Panzer House," the Marquis replied, "where we will rescue Watson. Then we will leave immediately by train for Hamburg to join my yacht. No one will know we are gone until the morning, and by that time we should be in the open sea." "What do you want me to do?" "I am going to ask something very difficult of you," the Marquis replied, "but it is the only way we can rescue Watson." "What is it?" Simona whispered. "Dawkins has found a door in the Panzer House which is not guarded on either side. It is bolted, and he noticed that the key was in the lock, but of course on the inside." Simona looked at him. "What do you want me to do?" she asked again. "The only possible way that we can open this door is for you to climb through the ventilator grating, which is above the door. It is unfortunately too small for either Dawkins or myself, But if you are brave enough, we are quite certain that you could squeeze through it into the Panzer house and open the door for us." For a moment, Simona did not speak, and the Marquis said, "If you feel it is something you cannot do, then I shall quite understand." He paused for a moment before adding, "I think I should tell you that Dawkins learned from the guards that they intend to start torturing Watson tomorrow, to make him tell them about the gun." Simona cried out, "They must be stopped." "It is what they will do," the Marquis asserted, "unless you can open the door for us so that we can rescue him." "But suppose the night watchmen hear me, and I am arrested?" Simona asked. "Dawkins has seen to that," the Marquis explained. "He gave them earlier this evening. In fact, he had only just arrived back when he came to your bedroom. Some very intoxicating red wine, which is a luxury they are unable to afford for themselves." "So they are drunk?" Simona stammered. "When Dawkins left them, they were very drunk. And as they are the night guard, they will not be relieved until dawn tomorrow morning." Simona sighed with relief. "If this was something I could do myself," the Marquis said, "I would do it. But I am afraid I am too big and too fat." Because fat could never describe the Marquis, Simona chuckled. "I am very, very grateful to you," the Marquis continued, "as Watson will be. I do not think either of us could bear to think of him suffering such an appalling manner." No, of course not," Simona agreed. The horses were moving quicker, and now they were travelling through what she recognized as the large wood in the centre of Berlin. Eventually, the horses slowed down, and finally the carriage came to a standstill. "We will have to walk from here," the Marquis said. "But I want you to make sure you memorize your way back to the carriage so that you can return here and change your clothes as soon as you have opened the door for us. From this moment on, we do not speak." I understand," Simona murmured. The Marquis helped Simona out of her coat and placed it on the opposite seat and climbed out of the carriage. When she followed him, he lifted her up into his arms. She realized he was saving her from walking in her diving suit to the building over the rough ground, but the sensation of his body against hers left her breathless. She could see their destination as a silhouette against the starlit sky. The Panzer house was a large and impressive building, and, Simona thought, rather frightening. Because she was so small and light, the Marquis carried her easily in his arms. She became aware that he was wearing soft-soled shoes, and his footsteps made no sound. She glanced back and saw that Dawkins was following them, carrying something in his arms. They passed through some trees and bushes until they reached what Simona could see in the moonlight was a massive door. It would be quite impossible for anyone to force it open from the outside. The Marquis put Simona down very gently on the grass, and she was already missing his comforting touch. Dawkins came forward, and she saw that he was carrying a short ladder in his arms. He laid it against the door and climbed up. He then began to work away at the iron grating above the door, which was obviously the ventilation shaft. It took Dawkins some time, because he was working as silently as possible. Gradually, he worked the grating loose first at one side and then at the other. Finally, it came away in his hands, and he passed it down to the Marquis, who laid it on the grass. Dawkins removed the ladder, and the Marquis picked Simona up in his arms again, so that her head was level with the opening. He was tall enough that the ladder was not needed. Simona could see it was just wide enough for her to squeeze her body through, and she should encounter no difficulty with her legs. The Marquis supported her so that she could enter the opening feet first. Holding tightly onto the sill, she twisted and turned until she had forced her body through. It was not at all easy, and she realized that it would have been impossible for a man, or even a woman as large as Karoline. Now, she was inside the Panzer house. Holding tightly to the bottom of the opening, she swung for a moment above the door before dropping silently to the floor. It was not as long a drop as she had feared, and her feet touched the ground. She found she was standing on a mat which was softer than if it had been wood or stone. Now, her next task was to open the door, but she was afraid that the bolts might be too high. To her relief, she found, by feeling with her hands in the dark, that there was a heavy bolt within reach on the door above the lock, and another one below it. Then she became worried that the bolts would be rusty and difficult to move, but she had, however, underestimated the efficiency of the Germans. The bolts were heavy, but well oiled. Simona pulled back using all her strength, and it was not too difficult after all. Now she had only to turn the key, which was not as stiff as it might have been. With not even a flicker of light to guide her, she felt around the bottom of the door and as far as she could reach upwards, but there were no more bolts. Now she was praying desperately that when she pulled at the door it would open to allow the Marquis and Dawkins to join her. She pulled, but nothing happened. She felt a sudden streak of fear and turned the key again. What had she forgotten to do? She pulled again. Now the door seemed to quiver. The Marquis on the outside realized that her task had been successful, and he and Dawkins slammed their combined weight against the door. With a rasping sound, which could have been caused by rust, it opened. Simona was only just quick enough to spring to one side, or it would have struck her. The Marquis ran in through the open door. He put his arm around Simona and drew her against him before whispering, "Well done. Go to the carriage quickly and change into your clothes." Almost before she realized what was happening, the Marquis and Dawkins had disappeared into the Panzer house, and she was alone. She slipped out through the door, and hurrying over the rough ground which hurt her feet, she quickly reached the carriage. One of the men on the box had obviously received clear instructions, as he hurried down quickly as soon as he saw Simona and opened the door for her. As she climbed in, he did not speak, but merely closed the door behind her. Simona was afraid that the Marquis and Dawkins might return before she had completed everything she had been told to do. She pulled off the black diving suit and dressed in her own clothes, which were waiting for her on the seat. As she finished dressing, she looked again at the bundle, wondering what it contained. It had been concealed by her travelling coat, which the Marquis had thrown over it when they left the carriage. Simona was now ready, except for her hat, which she thought could wait until they neared the station. She looked out of the window, but there was no sign of them coming through the bushes and the trees. She was suddenly afraid that, after all, the guards could have intercepted them. Were they, too, now captives like Watson? "Please, God, please do not let that happen," she prayed. "The Marquis must not fall into the hands of the Germans, because by some means, however horrible, they will steal the plans of his gun from him." She prayed fervently, not once, but many times. She was getting desperate. Simona thought she must go back to see what was happening, when at last she could see the three men moving swiftly through the bushes. "Thank you, God. Thank you," she choked. A moment later, they had reached the carriage. The Marquis clambered in, and the man whom she guessed must be Watson followed him. Even as Dawkins sprang onto the box, the horses set off. "You've done it, my lord. You've done it," Watson exclaimed. "How could you be so brilliant?" "You must thank Miss Bell for your rescue," the Marquis replied triumphantly. "Now, I want you to change as quickly as you can into the clothes which you are sitting on." Watson laughed. "I thought," he said, "my seat felt somewhat uncomfortable, my lord." The Marquis held out his arms and pulled Simona close to him. "Now, to save Watson's blushes," he said in an ordinary tone, as if they were sitting around the fireside, "you must close your eyes or hide your face against me." He drew her still closer as he spoke. Suddenly, because the tension was over, Simona felt herself beginning to cry. She tried to check it, but the tears ran down her cheeks. Now she was crying tempestuously as a child would have done. The Marquis drew her even closer. "It's all right, Simona," he told her softly. "It is all over, and you have been wonderful. No one else could have been so brave as to do what you have done, and I know how delighted the Prince of Wales will be when I tell him that we have saved the gun." Simona could not answer, and then she felt the Marquis stroking her hair. She groped for a handkerchief as he held her hands in his. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "There is nothing to be sorry about," the Marquis soothed her. "We have won more than half the battle, but we must not start cheering until we have shaken the soil of Germany off our feet." "It can't be soon enough for me, my lord," Watson chimed in. He was struggling into his new clothes, and as Simona stopped crying, she was wondering why he was taking so long. She was of the impression, when he had entered the carriage, that he was wearing just a shirt and trousers. "Now, what about my wig, my lord?" Watson asked. "It's difficult to see which is the front and which is the back of it." "Put it on any way that is comfortable," the Marquis replied. "It will not show much under your bonnet." Simona was so surprised at the last word that she moved slightly to look at the Marquis. "I have not explained to you," he said, "that Watson is travelling with us as your lady's maid. I obtained a special passport for him at the British Embassy today in the name of Paula Waite. That name can easily be altered when he wishes to become a man again." "Which will be just as soon as possible, my lord," Watson said. "I never fancied myself as a woman, and if I had to be one, it should have been several years ago when I had been better looking." The Marquis laughed. "What is more important is that you should have shaved today." "I did shave as it happens," Watson replied. "An awful palaver it was too, as they would not allow me alone with a razor in case I cut me throat." "At least we have saved you from that," the Marquis said. Watson gave a deep sigh. "It's what I would have had to do if they treated me as they intended." "Forget it," the Marquis said. "All we have to think about now is that you are a lady's maid to Miss Simona Bell, and you are travelling back to England with her. I should put on the glasses that you will find in a case." "I wondered what they were, my lord," Watson said. "And though I cannot see myself, I bet my own mother wouldn't recognise me." "I would hope not," the Marquis said. "And remember, we are not safe until we are aboard the Seahorse and out at sea." "I will be very careful, my lord," Watson agreed. "It ain't any fun being a prisoner of them Germans, I can tell you." "I am sure of that," the Marquis replied. "But you must tell me all about that later. I do not want you to upset Miss Simona." Watson lapsed into silence. A few moments later the Marquis exclaimed, "We have nearly reached the station, and there is a train in about 20 minutes. Simona moved from the Marquis's arms. "I must put on my hat." "There is no hurry," the Marquis responded. "There will only be a few passengers at this time of the night, and you will have plenty of time to tidy yourself in the waiting room." The carriage came to a standstill, and Dawkins started to unload their luggage. Simona observed the Marquis giving what she thought was a large sum of money to the two men who had been driving the carriage. It took Dawkins some time to find the only porter, who had been asleep. He piled their trunks and boxes onto a truck and trundled it onto the platform. The Marquis looked for the waiting room and said to Watson, "You had better come with us." The waiting room boasted only one light, but no fire, and mercifully there was nobody sitting on the polished leather seats. "I will see if I can find you something to drink," the Marquis suggested to Watson. "I would really prefer something to fill my empty stomach, my lord," Watson replied. "They've been starving me for the last couple of days." "I never thought of that. I will fetch you something immediately. Stay here and look after Miss Simona." He hurried out of the waiting room, and Watson said when he had left, "I am so very grateful, miss, that you helped to save me. It is something I never want to go through again." "Of course not," Simona said. "And I think you were very strong not to tell the Germans what they wanted to know." "They snatched me up, they did, when I least expected it," Watson said. "You would think you'd be safe enough in your own country, but them Germans be a menace anywhere, and that's the truth. You will have to write a book on your experiences," Simona proposed, "and tell the world about it." Watson laughed. "I ain't so handy with a pen, as I be with other tools, but I will finish that gun for his lordship if it kills me." Simona smiled at him. She thought he was being very plucky, considering what he had been through. The Marquis returned, followed by Dawkins, who was carrying a tray. "His lordship's robbed the canteen," he announced cheerily. "It ain't very exciting, but it's better than nothing." "I could eat a whole ox," Watson enthused. Dawkins placed the tray beside him, and he started to eat ravenously. His meal looked to Simona to consist mainly of sausage rolls, which had gone cold, and must, she thought, be rather nasty. Watson, however, appeared to enjoy them, and when he found some slices of meat, he ate them quickly in his fingers. He had only half finished the plate when they heard the train approaching. "I am not leaving this food behind," Watson exclaimed. He looked so funny sitting there dressed like a woman and wearing, as Simona appreciated, exactly the clothes a lady's maid would wear. A black dress, covered by a short coat, and a bonnet which fastened in a black bow under his chin. He did not look at all noticeable, and he could quite easily have been a middle-aged, rather plain woman in service. Dawkins had deftly taken what was left of the meat off the plate and put it into his handkerchief, which he handed to Watson. Then he hurried onto the platform to oversee the sleepy porter loading their luggage into the guard's van. Now that the train had arrived, an official in a smart uniform appeared from nowhere. The Marquis had decided that if by mischance a hue and cry was raised before they reached the Seahorse, there would be no point in trying to conceal his identity. When the official learnt the identity of the Marquis, he found them a first-class carriage, and having shown them inside, he locked the door to prevent anyone else from joining them. The Marquis tipped him. "What time shall we arrive in Hamburg?" he asked. "At 5:30, my lord," the official answered. There had been 2 or 3 passengers getting out at Berlin. However, apart from the Marquis's party, there were only 3 workmen who hurried into a third-class carriage. Then, as the train started to pull out of the station, Simona gave a sigh of relief. "You have won! You have won!" she cried. "We have spirited Watson away. How could you have been so shrewd as to dress him as my lady's maid?" "It was Dawkins who thought of it," the Marquis admitted. "In fact, it is Dawkins who has been responsible for organising his escape. I am just wondering what I can give him for being so smart." "I think he enjoys all the excitement," Simona said. "What about you?" the Marquis asked her. "I am glad, so very, very glad that we have rescued an Englishman from being tortured," Simona replied. "And I am sorry I became so emotional." She stammered over the words because she felt shy. "You have been magnificent all through," the Marquis asserted. "But we still have some way to go before we are free. Then we can decide what we will do next." Simona wondered what he meant by that. He was busy moving his hat and overcoat onto an empty seat, and she thought he did not want to answer questions. As the train gathered speed, she could only think how wonderful it all was. Not only had they enabled Watson to escape, but the Marquis was now free of the Countess. Simona could imagine how angry she would be tomorrow morning. Her prey had flown, and she had failed those, like the Baron, who had placed such confidence in her skills as a seductress. "She is a bad woman, and I hate her," Simona told herself. Then, as the Marquis returned and sat down beside her, she said, "I can ask you now, who were the men who were driving us in that smart carriage?" "2 hand-picked Secret Service members of the British Embassy," the Marquis replied. "When I was there this morning, I told the British ambassador what I intended to do. He gave me a passport for Watson and offered me the services of his 2 most trusted men. They have been trying unsuccessfully to find out where Watson was imprisoned for some time now." Simona smiled. "So they were impressed that you had managed to succeed where they had failed?" "I think they were extremely thankful. The ambassador told me he had received many secret instructions from England that Watson must be found and returned immediately." "I suppose that was because you had been agitating for his release." "Quite right, Simona," the Marquis replied. "I was very concerned when I found that Watson had disappeared, and furious that the Germans had managed to spirit him away before anyone could suspect what had occurred." "Now you have proven that you are much cleverer than they are," Simona exclaimed. "The person who has been clever is you," the Marquis replied. "Watson said it was absolutely impossible to break into the Panzer house except by that particular door, which was the only one unguarded." "They will have a shock tomorrow morning," Simona said gleefully. "And so will the Countess," the Marquis remarked. Simona looked at him. "I have just realized that you recovered from your hay fever attack very quickly. How did you manage that?" The Marquis laughed. "Very easily. I stopped snorting that beastly pepper that Dawkins gave me. It was not only extremely unpleasant, but made my nose very sore." Simona chuckled. "It was a virtuoso performance, and I was completely taken in by you. I was worrying about you being so ill. Now you have found out it was all pretense." "And I refuse to worry about you ever again," Simona answered. "You are too good an actor, and you think up too many cunning schemes." "I think Dawkins and you will have to write a book together," the Marquis suggested. "I can take very little credit for this escapade, however many others I may have been involved in. But it is you who must write the book. Think how exciting it will be for your children to read." As she spoke, she remembered that the Marquis intended never to get married. He noticed the colour rise in her cheeks, which made her look lovelier than any woman he had ever seen. He felt a sudden impulse to tell her so, but he knew they were alone and unchaperoned, and he must behave like a gentleman. "What I am going to request," he suggested, "is that you make a pillow of your coat, and I will cover you with mine, and you must try to get to sleep. We have a 2-hour journey ahead of us, and I did wake you up when you had hardly begun your beauty sleep, though that, I may add, is sincerely quite unnecessary." Simona smiled at him. "Now it is over, I would have hated to miss it all, and I am sorry I behaved so foolishly when you and Watson came back to the carriage. I will tell you more about your behaviour when we are on the seahorse." "Your yacht is something I am longing to see," Simona said, not really understanding what he had meant, "and there are a lot more questions I want to ask you." "So you will not be bored while we are crossing the North Sea, which can be very rough at times?" "Nothing will seem rough after what we have just been through. I think it is a sensible idea that we should both go to sleep, and you must not be too grand to lie down and relax. I assure you that I have slept in far worse places than this train," the Marquis smiled. Simona did as he had suggested, and arranged her coat as a cushion, refusing to allow him to put his coat over her. She told him she was warm enough, and he needed it as a pillow for himself. He accepted her offer, and they both lay full length on the reasonably comfortable seats. As she closed her eyes, Simona thought that no one would believe what had happened, or what was still happening to her. It was all so exciting, so dramatic and thrilling, and she was here alone with the Marquis, and no one would disturb them. "It is all so wonderful," she thought to herself, and felt her heart beating in a very strange manner. Chapter 7. When the train arrived at Hamburg, they hired a carriage to the port where the seahorse was waiting exactly where the Marquis had ordered the captain to moor it. As they went aboard, Simona sighed again with relief. She had been so looking forward to seeing the Marquis's yacht, feeling sure that it would be very much an expression of himself, which indeed she found it to be. When she walked into the saloon, she found it was extremely attractive. It was furnished in exactly the way she expected the saloon in a grand yacht to look. The Marquis was busy giving orders. The yacht's engines were already humming, and after a few preliminaries with the port officials, the seahorse began to move slowly into the centre of the river. It was then that Simona thought she would like to change her clothes. She asked a steward if he knew where her cabin was. "His lordship's valet is there already, miss," he replied. Simona clambered down. There were, she found, 8 cabins opening off the main passage. It was not difficult to find Dawkins, as the door was open, and he was busy unpacking her clothes. "We've done it, miss," he said as Simona entered. "Yes, it is so exciting," she agreed. "How long will it take us to reach the sea?" "About 2 hours, miss," Dawkins replied. He finished putting her clothes into a cupboard and shut the case. "Are you going to lie down, miss?" he asked, "or change your clothes?" "I would like to change," Simona answered. "I expect his lordship will now want breakfast." "That's what Mr. Watson is enjoying already," Dawkins replied. "I've never seen a small man eat so much so quickly." Simona laughed, but at the same time she thought it horrifying that the Germans should have starved their prisoner to extort information from him. Dawkins excused himself. She took off the dress she had travelled in and put on a lighter and more attractive one. She was sure it was going to be a hot day, and she hoped she could go on deck with the Marquis. Perhaps he would tell her about the palaces they were passing as they steamed down the river. "I will be alone with him," she thought with joy. "No one can interrupt us." It was still early. She felt certain that neither the Baron nor the Countess could yet be aware that the Marquis had escaped. When they read her letter, they would have to pretend to be sympathetic that her father was ill. Equally, she was sure that they would be grinding their teeth with rage, knowing there would be no chance of extracting the secrets of the gun from the Marquis. "We have outsmarted them," Simona told herself triumphantly. She washed her face and hands. When she looked in the mirror, she hoped that the Marquis would think that she looked pretty. She had been so afraid that he was really captivated by the Countess and still finding her irresistible. She was intelligent enough to acknowledge that the Marquis had deliberately kept the Countess happy and unsuspicious until they could escape with Watson. "He is so astute, so very brilliant," she said to herself. "I shall miss him terribly when I go back to Papa and Mamma." She was wondering how much of what had happened to her should she tell her father and mother. She felt perhaps they might be shocked at her wearing nothing but a deep-sea diving suit and squeezing through a grating. At the same time, she had achieved something essential for her country, and her father would appreciate that and be proud of her. She too thought that he would be interested by the strange fact that the Kaiser had been so fascinated by her hands that he had actually stopped asking the Marquis difficult questions about the gun. It has all been like a story out of a novel, she thought again. She strolled back to the saloon, hoping that the Marquis would join her, but she learned from the steward that he was still on the bridge with the captain. "I expect you would like to take some breakfast, miss," he said. "I will tell the lordship that his is ready." Simona saw that breakfast was laid out on a table at one side of the saloon. On the other side, there was a handsome flat-top writing desk, which she recognized as Regency from its gold clawed feet. She also appreciated the beautiful gold inkstand, thinking it must have been given to the Marquis as a presentation at a grand occasion. She did not have to wait long before he appeared for his breakfast. He too had changed his clothes, and now he was wearing white trousers and a boating jacket with gilt buttons. He smiled when he saw Simona and said, "As you must realize, we are on our way. As soon as we are at sea, we can relax and enjoy ourselves. The stewards are bringing us breakfast, and I hear that Mr. Watson is eating us out of house and home." He laughed. "I told him not to change from being a woman until the German coast is no longer in sight. After that, he can be himself again." "Such a splendid disguise," Simona declared. "I am sure it must have been Dawkins who brought exactly the right clothes and wig for a lady's maid." "Dawkins is a genius, there is no doubt about it," the Marquis replied, "and I could not have managed without him." He looked at Simona before he added, "Or, of course, without you. It is really your triumph, not mine." The way he spoke brought colour to her cheeks, and the Marquis thought it had been a long time since he had known a woman who actually blushed, or one who did it so attractively. He did not, however, want to embarrass Simona with too many compliments, so he sat down at the table saying, "Will you please pour me a cup of coffee? Like you, I am very hungry." On cue, the stewards brought in several dishes of eggs, bacon, and fresh fish. Both the Marquis and Simona ate without saying anything until the meal was finished, and then the Marquis remarked, "We seem to be making good headway. Would you like to come out on deck with me?" "Of course I would. I want you to tell me about the interesting places we are passing, because I have a feeling I will never see them again." "I can say the same," the Marquis agreed. "I do not think we will be very welcome in Germany for a long time. Of course, they will know that we have rescued Watson and taken him away with us." "As they stole him in the first place," Simona protested indignantly. "They can hardly complain." "That is true. But the Kaiser does not like being thwarted in any way, and I think we should not underrate him as a dangerous enemy." "Now you are frightening me," Simona replied. They walked out onto the deck, where the sun was shining and the river a streak of silver stretching ahead of them. Because the seahorse looked so impressive, onlookers stared and waved as they moved down the river. The river grew wider. Simona thought that the countryside they were passing was particularly beautiful. The Marquis pointed out to her the spires of several churches and 2 or 3 mansions in the distance which he had visited. Eventually, just ahead of them, they had their first sight of the open sea. Simona wanted to stand on the bow of the yacht, but the sun, however, was really very hot. Without saying anything, she walked back to ask the steward if there was a sunshade on board. If not, she would fetch her hat. "I think there is a sunshade, miss," the steward answered. "I will find it for you." "That would be very kind." She returned to the saloon, thinking again how attractive it was. Because she was interested, she walked over to the writing desk to take a closer look at the gold inkstand. She was just touching it when the Marquis entered. "We shall be in the North Sea in a few minutes," he said. "Now we can really begin to relax and enjoy ourselves." As he spoke, he moved beside her to open one of the drawers in the writing desk. Taking a revolver from the pocket of his jacket, he placed it carefully into the drawer. "I was looking at your inkstand," Simona said. "I am sure this lovely object was given to you because of some magnificent achievement." "I do not like to boast," the Marquis answered, "but it was in fact a present from the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. I had helped him in a rather difficult case when he could find no solution to his many problems. But he found one. I was lucky, but on that occasion I did not have someone very lovely called Simona to help me. For a moment she looked at him wide-eyed, and again she blushed. I have a great deal to say to you, Simona, but I've been waiting until we were at sea. Simona felt her heart turning a somersault. Before she was able to find a reply, she became aware that the yacht had slowed down and stopped. "What on earth has happened?" the Marquis exclaimed. He moved quickly from behind the writing desk and had reached the centre of the saloon when a steward appeared carrying some drinks and glasses. He set them down on a side table. "Why are we stopping?" the Marquis asked sharply. "I think it is something to do with the coast guard," the steward replied. "Oh, is that why?" the Marquis remarked. He turned as if to walk back to Simona when the door of the saloon again opened. This time, another steward announced, "Herr Richter to see you, my lord." A man came into the room who was obviously German. He assumed an air of authority, although he was not wearing a uniform. The steward who had announced him closed the door behind him. Herr Richter stood for a moment looking at the Marquis, as if, Simona thought, he was appraising him. Then he said in good English, but with a strong accent, "I understand, sir, that you are the Marquis of Midhurst?" "That is correct." "I have instructions," the German proclaimed, "to take you ashore, as there are certain questions to be asked of you regarding your visit to Berlin." Simona drew in her breath. The Marquis replied quite calmly, "Questions? Questions by whom?" "The order has come to me," Herr Richter said somewhat ponderously, "from my headquarters, but I understand that it is the Emperor himself who requires your answers." "Then I am afraid," the Marquis retorted, "that I cannot oblige His Majesty at this moment. It is most important that I return to England at once, and as you know, we have already reached the open sea." "His Majesty will not take no for an answer," Herr Richter said. "Therefore, sir, I must insist that you accompany me to shore, immediately." "And if I refuse?" the Marquis asked quietly. The German drew a revolver from his pocket and pointed it at him. For a moment there was complete silence. Simona stifled an exclamation of horror. Still quietly, with almost a note of amusement in his voice, the Marquis ventured, "Are you really threatening to shoot me when you must be aware that such an act would cause an international incident, indeed a major diplomatic crisis?" "I will not kill you," Herr Richter responded, "but if you are wounded in the arm, you will have to be taken to hospital right away. And from there, it will not be difficult to convey to you where I am instructed to take you." Again there was silence, almost as if she was guided by what the Marquis had called a greater power. Simona, who was still standing behind the writing desk, gently opened the drawer. Her fingers touched the revolver. "Now surely," the Marquis said calmly, "we can talk this over amicably." "You will come with me now, sir," Herr Richter replied, "or I will shoot you in the arm." At that moment, Simona took the revolver out of the drawer, aimed it, and fired. She had intended to hit the German in the hand, but the bullet struck the finger he held on the trigger, and at the same time the trigger itself. Herr Richter screamed and fell backwards. As he did so, his revolver went off, and a bullet buried itself in the ceiling. With the swiftness of a man who had known danger, the Marquis in one bound reached Simona, taking his revolver from her hand and thrusting it into his pocket. Immediately the door opened, and 2 Germans followed by several stewards came rushing into the saloon. The Marquis bent over the fallen Herr Richter with a look of concern on his face. "What has happened?" one of the Germans gasped, speaking in German. "An unfortunate accident," the Marquis replied. "Herr Richter was showing me his revolver, which is different from any I have yet seen, when it accidentally exploded, injuring his finger, and, as you can see, damaging the revolver itself." He pointed as he spoke to where it lay on the ground with a portion of Herr Richter's finger. He was groaning, and blood was pouring from his hand. "Get him to a hospital," the Marquis said in a commanding tone, "as soon as possible. He is losing a great deal of blood, which can be very dangerous." The 2 Germans realized it was an order. They picked up Herr Richter by his shoulders, while 2 stewards carried his legs. As they staggered out of the saloon and across the deck, another steward picked up the revolver and wiped the mess off the floor with a napkin. "Give that revolver to the Germans," the Marquis ordered sharply, "and tell the captain full speed ahead." "Very good, my lord," the steward replied. He hurried out of the saloon, followed by the Marquis. Simona could not believe what had just happened. How could it be possible that at the last moment the Marquis had nearly been arrested? She was certain that he would have been prevented from leaving Germany unless he had handed over Watson and his plans for the gun. "I have saved him," she whispered. "I have saved him. He could not have stopped them taking Watson away." Then it flashed through her mind that perhaps even now the other 2 Germans would try to seize the Marquis on their own. Even as that fear seemed to seep through her, the door of the saloon opened, and it was the Marquis. He stood just inside the saloon, looking at her. For a moment, she could not move. He held out his arms. Simona ran impulsively towards him, hurling herself against him. "Have they gone? Are you safe? Can we go now?" The words seemed to tumble from her lips, as though she had no control over them. The Marquis's arms tightened. Without speaking, his lips came down on hers. He kissed her wildly, passionately, as if he too had been desperately afraid. He kissed her lips, her eyes, her cheeks, and then her lips again. All the time he was holding her closer and closer. She felt her whole body melting into his, until she became part of him. They did notice that Dawkins had peeped into the saloon, saw what was happening, and had closed the door gently to stand outside like a sentinel, refusing to allow anyone to enter. Finally, the Marquis raised his head. "You have saved me, my darling. How could you have been so brave, so courageous? I really thought I was lost. I was so frightened, terribly frightened, that he would take you away," Simona murmured. The Marquis kissed her again. "I have been wanting to kiss you for a very long time. Now you must tell me what you feel." "I love you," Simona whispered. "I love you so much. I could not bear anyone to hurt you." The Marquis kissed her until they were both breathless. Then, because her heart was beating so violently, Simona hid her head against his shoulder. "This has all been too much for you, my precious," the Marquis said. "But now I can no longer prevent myself from kissing you and telling you how wonderful I think you are." "I never thought that you would say such things to me," Simona sighed. "I have wanted to say them since the first moment I met you," the Marquis replied. "And when you told me what I needed to know to save Watson, I thought you could not be real, but an angel sent down from heaven just to help me." "I was so frightened," Simona murmured, "that you would be captivated by the Countess." She had not meant to admit this to the Marquis, yet the fear had been uppermost in her mind for so long that the words poured out without her being able to prevent them. The Marquis laughed. "Why do you think I had to pretend to have an attack of hay fever?" he asked. "It was so clever of you, and it was only later that I realized that it was all pretense." "So you really believed that I thought her more beautiful than you?" the Marquis demanded. "How could you be so foolish?" Simona hid her face against his chest again, as he said very gently to her, "You never need be jealous of any other woman, now or in the future. How soon will you marry me, my precious darling?" Simona was still. I thought," she breathed, "that you intended never to marry." "I intended never to marry until I met you," the Marquis asserted. "Then I knew that you were mine, and no one else should ever have you but me. I am convinced, my adorable one, that we will be very happy together." Simona looked up at him. "I love you," she cried, "with all my heart and soul. I will try my best to make you happy and prevent anyone from hurting you." "And that too is the vow I have taken," the Marquis replied. "So I think the sooner we are married, the safer we shall be." Simona looked at him inquiringly as he said, "Come and sit on the sofa. I want to talk to you." She realized they were still standing just inside the door. Now they were right out to sea, and moving at the fastest speed that the yacht could sail. "We are now safe," she murmured. "Completely safe, my darling, except that I think it would be a mistake for us to return to England just yet." Simona stared at him in surprise as he led her to the sofa and they sat down. He pulled her towards him and said, "I have a plan, but if you dislike it, I must think of something else." "What is your plan?" "First, I think it would be a great mistake for us to arrive in England immediately with Watson. After what has just happened, the Kaiser's spies, and there are a great number of them, will be looking out for us." Simona shivered. "Can they hurt us?" she inquired. "They might, and they will certainly try to steal Watson away again." Simona cried out. "They must not." No, of course not," he agreed. "And that is why I want you to listen to my suggestion." She raised her hand to touch his cheek very gently. "I am listening, and I will always listen to anything you say to me." For a moment the Marquis made a movement as if to kiss her, but he restrained himself, saying, "What I want, if you want it too, is to be married immediately by my captain." Simona gasped and looked at him open-eyed, but she did not interrupt. "We will then cable your parents to inform them of our marriage," the Marquis continued, "and go on our honeymoon." "Honeymoon?" Simona muttered beneath her breath. "I want to take you to Venice," he said, "to Greece, and then to look at the Sphinx and tell you that its secret is simply love and more love." Simona gave a little laugh that was almost a cry. "I do not believe it. This is not happening to me." "It is. Everything I always wanted and dreamt about. And you are making it come true." "We will both make it come true, if you agree." "Of course I agree," Simona sighed. "It is the most wonderful and marvellous idea I have ever heard." "When we return to England, everything will have calmed down, and doubtless the Kaiser will have found something else to interest him, rather than worrying about a gun that does not yet exist." He stopped for a moment to kiss Simona's forehead. "I know in your clever little brain that you will appreciate that Watson can work on the gun here, on the Seahorse, when no one can get him. Perhaps when we do reappear in England, we can present the plans to the Prince of Wales as a gift." "This is the most fantastic and glorious moment in my entire life," Simona cried. The Marquis looked at her very tenderly. "May I, with your permission, inform our captain that we wish to be married at once? I have waited a very long time for you, my precious." Simona laughed. "I think, actually, it is only a few days." "It seems to me like several centuries," the Marquis replied. "But now we are running away from trouble and running to a happiness and love which is different from anything I have ever known in my life." Simona draped her arms around his neck. "I love you. I love you. Now I am quite certain that this is just a dream, and I shall wake up at any moment. I am just praying that it is all really true." "Your prayers will be answered, but you will have to allow me to go and tell the captain what he has to do." He rose to his feet and pulled her up too. "I can imagine nothing more wonderful," he said, "than kissing you now as I want to, except that when we are married, I can teach you, my precious, about love. Clever though you are, I think love is a subject in which you are somewhat ignorant." Teach me, Simona begged, "and quickly, in case this really is a dream." The Marquis laughed and kissed her again, and just when she would have clung him forever, he gently sat her down on the sofa and walked from the saloon. Simona watched him go before running down to her cabin. She had put on quite a pretty dress for breakfast. Now she wanted one that was even prettier. She chose one from those which Dawkins had hung up in the cupboard. She was just wondering how she could do up the back of her dress when there was a knock on the door. When she said, "Come in," Dawkins appeared. "I am glad you have come, Dawkins," she said. "Please do up my gown for me." "I wondered, miss, if I could help, and as I hears you're being married, I think perhaps you'll need me." "Of course I need your help. And what shall I wear on my hair?" Dawkins thought for a moment before looking in the cupboard. One of the evening dresses Simona had taken with her to Berlin was decorated with tiny silk roses, which were sprinkled with diamante as if it was dew. She saw Dawkins staring at them and knew what he was thinking. "I'll sew them back, miss, for you afterwards," Dawkins said. "Have you got a pair of scissors?" Simona found a pair in her dressing case. Dawkins cut a number of roses off the evening dress and pinned them onto a thin ribbon. She arranged them on her head as a wreath and thought no bride could have worn anything prettier. "Thank you, Dawkins," Simona smiled. "That was very original of you. His lordship says when you're ready, would you come up to the saloon?" "I am ready now," Simona answered. "I think that this is a very unusual way to be married." "It saves you a lot of handshaking and a lot of people looking at you with envious eyes, especially them women as wanted to marry his lordship, and he wouldn't marry any of them." "I am sure they will be as angry as the Countess," Simona agreed. "But I really am the luckiest woman in the whole wide world." She spoke with such fervour in her voice that Dawkins was moved. "You'll be just the right lady for his lordship," he said, "and there's never been anyone in the past I could say that to." "Thank you for saying it to me," Simona answered, "and I promise you I will look after him and make him very happy." "That's what I wants for him, and you be the right one, miss, and I says it with all my heart." Simona smiled at him. Then, as if she could not wait any longer, she hurried up the companionway and into the saloon. The Marquis was standing at the far end, and the captain was beside him. Simona wanted to throw herself into the Marquis's arms, and yet she forced herself to walk quietly towards him. She felt his fingers close over hers, and she knew he understood. "There are to be 2 witnesses, my darling," the Marquis told her quietly. "One, of course, is Dawkins, and I thought you would understand if the other one is Watson." "But of course, they will both want to witness your wedding," Simona replied. "Our wedding," the Marquis corrected her. As he spoke, Dawkins and Watson, who was now dressed as a man again, entered the saloon. They stayed at the back by the door, while the Marquis and Simona stood in front of the captain. He opened his prayer book and read the words of the marriage ceremony slowly and solemnly. When the Marquis and Simona had made their vows, and the Marquis had placed his signet ring on her finger, the captain said, "As captain of the yacht, the Seahorse, and with the power given to me by Her Majesty Queen Victoria, I join you as man and wife together, and may God bless your union." For a moment there was silence. Then the Marquis said, "Thank you very much, Captain. I hope now you will drink our health." As he spoke, the stewards came in with champagne, and Watson and Dawkins drank the toast which was proposed by the captain. Having shaken hands with the bride and the bridegroom, the 3 men left the saloon. Just for a moment, the Marquis stood looking at Simona. "We are now married," she murmured in a small voice. "You are my wife, my darling, and I am thinking that no man could have one more lovely, more brilliant, or more perfect, in every possible way." "I hope you will always think so," Simona replied. "And no woman could have a more handsome or wonderful husband than you." The last words were breathed against his lips as he was kissing her. A little later he said, "A great deal has happened this morning, and it is still very early. The captain has received orders to begin our voyage towards the Mediterranean." "For our honeymoon," Simona exclaimed. "Exactly. And may I remind you, my precious, that we lost last night with all this excitement, so we are now going to rest. I have told the stewards we will let them know when we next want a meal, which may be very late in the afternoon." Simona looked at him inquiringly. He took her arm and led her from the saloon down the companionway and along the passage. To her surprise, he did not go as she had expected into the room where she had changed. Instead, he walked to the room at the far end, which she guessed was the master cabin, and which she had not expected to be so large or attractive. There was a large bed in the middle of the room, and 4 portholes, all curtained with an attractive chintz. "This will be your room, my precious," the Marquis announced. "But I must not take it away from you," Simona protested. He smiled. "I shall be sharing it with you. The bed is really made for 2 people. Simona blushed as he added. "As I have already said, we have missed a night, and now we are going to make up for it." As he spoke, he left her, closing the door behind him. Simona saw that the bed was turned down, and one of her pretty lace-trimmed nightgowns was lying on the eiderdown. She undressed quickly, taking off her wreath of roses and laying it carefully on the dressing table. All Simona could think about was the Marquis, and that her love for him was growing every second. "I love him. I love him," she thought. "How can it be possible that I can be married to anyone so wonderful?" The door opened and the Marquis entered. He was wearing the same long dark robe as when she had visited his room in Berlin. He sat down on the bed and looked at Simona. "When I came to wake you, so that we could go and save Watson," he said, "I thought I'd never seen anyone look so lovely, so exquisite, so utterly desirable." He drew in his breath, as if he was remembering what he had felt at that moment, and continued, "I knew then that you were mine, and I would never lose you." "You did not tell me," Simona managed to say. "It was too soon. You might not have believed me, and I was finding it hard to understand what I was feeling myself." She looked at him inquiringly as he explained. "What I felt for you, my precious, was different from anything I have ever felt for any other woman. As you know, there have been quite a number in my life, but I never intended to marry any of them. All I wanted from a woman was excitement and amusement." What do you want from me?" Simona asked nervously. "I want you completely," the Marquis answered. "Not only your heart and your soul, but your thoughts, your mind, your love, and, God willing, our children." Simona murmured and hid her face against his shoulder. "I want to give you lots of sons," she sighed, "and they will be handsome like you, ride like you, and will be as intelligent as you." The Marquis laughed. "At least we can try," he suggested. He bent to kiss her. Then, when she was longing to encircle her arms around his neck, he took off his robe and climbed into bed beside her. He knew, because she was so young and so innocent, that he would need to be very gentle. Equally, he knew that he had never felt so happy or so ecstatic as at this very moment. This was different. This was what he had prayed for and thought he would never find. As he kissed Simona and continued to kiss her, he knew that together they would touch the peaks of ecstasy. The love that they felt for each other was the love which came only from God. It was the love that surmounts danger, evil, and cruelty. The love that is perfect comes from heaven, and once found, will continue into eternity. Love Wins in Berlin. Written by Barbara Cartland.